Hello, it's January 22nd, 2005, and my name is Sara de Vries. I'm daughter-in-law to John and Joanne de Vries, and today we're doing a film on the life of William and Sylvia de Vries. Unfortunately, both of them have already passed away, so we have the privilege of interviewing Jerry de Vries, who's the second son of William and Sylvia. Thanks so much for doing this with us today, Uncle Jerry. I'm wondering if you can just start off. We're going to talk about Paca's parents' story. Can you tell us a little bit about them, what their names were, what they were like, that kind of stuff?
My dad's name was Paca Sijke,
Mm-hmm.
after whom Ted is named, of course. And I only remember him when I was still a very little boy, because I think he died when I was about 4 or 5 years old.
Okay.
And I do remember him, though. If you knew Uncle Frank from the States, he looked a lot like his dad, Moike Anna, and Uncle Frank from the States. There was the oldest son, my dad's oldest brother, and he had a lot of things that he looked like his dad in. Paca Sijke was, he was of course I only know him as a very old, pretty well retired farmer, but he did farming and just work a little bit of land and just sell the produce off it. He had, his wife was Beppa Anna, my dad's mom,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a total of 7 children in the family. And my dad was the second oldest. And so, Paca Sijke, he had heart problems, and when we rode with him the last time that I remember, he was sitting on the horse and wagon, but he had to turn around because he couldn't face the wind. And he took us home from where we lived in Chimarum to where they lived in Sexbierum.
Okay.
And it was probably about a half an hour drive with the horse and the wagon.
Mm-hmm.
But he had to turn around, and shortly after that, his heart condition got so bad that he passed away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How did Paca's parents relate as a couple? Did he ever talk about how his parents related to each other? Were they, kind, or were they strict, or did they, were they nice to each other, or that kind of stuff?
Yeah, you have to go back a long way because my dad was born in 1911,
Mm-hmm.
and he was the second one. So Paca Sijke and Beppa Anna, they got married already in, I'm not sure exactly the date. We can find that out from Josie. She has all that.
Okay.
But in those days, customs and the way people did things was different than now. There wasn't much openness, although I'm sure they had an excellent marriage and relationship. But people didn't talk like they do now. There was not that openness between even married people, or between parents and children, and what there is now.
Might have been more focused commitment.
Yeah, it was
Type
commitment.
marriage. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do we want to talk about Beppa Anna?
Beppa Anna, is that the sister?
That is Paca Sijke's wife, my dad's mom.
Yes, yeah. If you know anything about her.
Yes, I do know a little bit about her because she lived a lot longer.
Okay.
And so we knew her much better. Whenever my mom would have a baby, then Beppa Anna would almost always come and take care of us children.
Okay.
And she was good. She was stern. She was not a person that you could slip things by easy. She was not a very easygoing person. She was a very good person, but
Okay.
she wasn't a long-suffering, genteel person, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When she got older, though, and she lived in the village where Omke Samen Moike lived, which is my dad's youngest brother, and they always lived, they still live in Holland. When Beppa Anna got older, then we got more openness out of her because she started to fail, and then she started to worry about her eternal destiny.
Okay.
Although she'd gone to church all her life,
Mm-hmm.
but never, and made commitments, of course, but never. In those days, it wasn't often openly talked about,
Mm-hmm.
and they wouldn't easily say where they stood as matters of faith go.
Yeah.
But when she started to then ask questions about, like she was worried about her destiny, then Omke Samen would just tell her, "Don't you believe that Jesus died for you?"
Mm-hmm.
And she'd say, "Yeah, I know, but..." And then he would explain nicely to her, Jesus died on the cross to take away the sins of the world, and he who believes has eternal life. And then she would say, you say exactly what my husband always used to say too. Pater Tsepke, when he died, he knew where he was going. He was secure in his salvation.
That's good, because you don't hear that a lot with some of the older generations, you know. That's great. Who was Paka named after?
My dad, Willem, was named after Paka Willem, which was his mother's dad.
Okay.
Willem.
Okay. And what was he like?
Romkes. Romkes was the last name.
Romkes.
Romkes.
Okay. What was Paka like as he was growing up as a child? Like, did he tell you many stories of his youth?
He told us some stories. I have never known Paka Willem. He passed away, of course, before we were born.
No, I actually mean of Paka. Can you tell me? Okay.
About my dad. I remember my dad best when I was a small boy and we were working in the field. He would be digging potatoes or whatever. He usually worked with other people. There was always people around. But Dad was always energetic, always trying to find other ways to make life easier and to find work to do that would be productive and easy going. What people did in those days, when they got married, they rented just a little bit of land wherever they could get it, and then they just tried to grow a crop. And it didn't take all that long, and Dad realized that he didn't have enough land to keep himself busy all the time. So he got some horses and started working for other people to help with their work and to get paid for it. That's how he started his eventual custom work business also.
Okay.
He started by just working for other people a little bit and more and more and more. First with horses and after the war with tractors and machinery.
Yeah, well, I'm imagining too with so many children, you know, you need to have a lot of food to actually
He
feed
didn't
all these
start
little
without
kids.
children. He didn't start out with children, no, they came one at a time.
Yeah, you're right.
I remember that Dad said that when they got married, there wasn't much available. It was 1935 or 1936 that they got married. 1936, I think it was. Yeah, Ted was born in 37, right? And I know that he had to go to a house a couple of kilometers away with the bike to pick up 2 chairs on the back of the bike for them to sit on.
Okay.
And when they, where they first lived, they had a wee little table and 2 chairs, and that's all the furniture they had in the house.
Wow.
You know,
Well, it enhances communication if you only have 2 chairs to look at each other with. That's good. Did he say what he was like as a boy though ever? Like, did he have many siblings, or you know, was he happy-go-lucky, or was he, I don't know?
I think he was the second one. Uncle Frank was the oldest one, and who could tease nicely all the time. And Dad was a little more short-tempered,
Okay.
and he would likely not stand for too much teasing, at least not all the time.
Okay.
But I think that as Dad was growing up, we didn't hear a lot about that, but I think he had a very normal youth and active in many things. I know he went to the young boys club at the church that they had in those days, where they talked about all kinds of things, but specifically about the Bible and about faith and church and relationships and things like that.
Did Paka come to faith at a young age, or was it different?
He made a
back then?
commitment as a young age, because in those days when you were a member of the Reformed or Christian Reformed Church, it was the accepted thing. Well, of course, first of all, they were sprinkled as an infant, and then as they grew up, they would go to Sunday school and catechism. No Sunday school. There was no Sunday school in those days. They would go to catechism classes, and they would go with the parents to church, and then eventually they would come to a place in their life where it was expected to make a commitment to the church and become a church member, which they all did, and seriously. And Dad used to tell us they had good discussions always at the youth groups, and they were not combined. They were only the boys and girls were always separate.
Okay, a good decision, eh?
Well, I'm not so sure, because anyway, but we live in a different age now. Things have changed.
Can you tell us maybe a little bit about his relationship with Peter van der Skaaf? I know there's something about swimming. Do you know the story about him swimming?
Peter, Dave.
Sorry, David. David van der Skaaf.
Yeah, but Dad and Mr. Van der Schaaf, they were from the same village, of course. And Mr. Van der Schaaf was in Holland they used to come around with horse and buggy, or later on with trucks, like van type things. And they would bring the produce to the people that bought it right off the cart.
Yeah.
That's how they used to do that. And so he was a traveling merchant, and his produce was produce, like veggies and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And he would almost always, Mr. Van der Schaaf, come to our house on Saturday late afternoon because he wanted to clear his wagon. And my mom and dad had lots of mouths to feed.
Yes.
And Mom would buy it for next to nothing.
Ah.
But my dad would always end up standing outside the window, and they would talk and talk and talk for the longest time, him and Mr. Van der Schaaf,
Okay.
because they had a lot of things in common.
Yeah.
I had to always chuckle at it because Mr. Van der Schaaf, you remember him probably. He was a man, and he would just stand straight and look straight at the whole world. Dad would always kind of bend over, but he'd just, argue back and forth, like often about things relating to church or relating to later on about maybe immigrating, because Mr. Van der Schaaf already immigrated, I think, in 1948.
Okay.
And we came in 56, so that was quite a while later. But about an incident, no, that was not Mr. Van der Schaaf with the swimming incident.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it should be told. It was my mom and dad and another couple went out, and unless we're talking about two different things. But what they did, they didn't have bathing suits, and they could rent bathing suits.
Oh.
The
okay.
women, and which they did, my mom and the other lady, but they could not get the bathing suit off again because the thing shrunk so bad. So they had an awful hard time getting it off later on in the day. That was the story we know about the swimming, right?
Okay, actually, yes, I understood that David van der Schaaf, he was asked by Paka, can you swim? They were going swimming. He said, oh, yeah, I can swim. And apparently he couldn't swim, and he was thrashing about or something.
I have not heard that.
So David saved him or something
David
like
told
that.
us
So.
that.
Oh,
Okay, yeah. We actually used to meet him at the Tichelaars farm, the apple farm.
Yeah.
How did the First World War affect Paka's youth? Did he ever talk about that? I know he was a young boy.
My dad was born in 1911.
Okay, yeah.
So the war started in 1914, and no, he never talked much about it.
No? Okay.
But don't forget, Holland was neutral
Okay, yeah. So it
in
probably
the First
wouldn't
World
affect
War.
it much.
Holland did not participate in the World War. They benefited greatly by it in Holland because they produced everything they could and sent it to the war front on both sides. That's how things went.
Yep.
But the Second World War, Dad had a lot of experiences in.
Yeah, okay.
Of course, he had to hide because he was just in the age that the Germans would take all those men to Germany, to work in the factories and all that.
Yeah.
But he technically got a permission because he was a agrarian, like a farmer, and they needed people to make the produce. So they gave him like a letter so that he could show that he was free.
Yeah.
Except it was not to be trusted all the time, so they often did go in hiding whenever there was a raid in the village.
Okay.
I remember the war yet too, and Mom does too, because when the war was over, we were 7.
Wow.
And so we remember the last years of the war. We remember the people being chased around the village. We remember people running through the fields being shot at.
Wow.
We remember bombs being dropped on the streets
Wow.
and in the houses, and places burning down,
Wow.
soldiers marching and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
But the war, I asked my mother a few years back, and I said, what were the war years like? She says, they were the worst, but they were the best.
Okay.
Because you had so much cohesion with people. You felt so close with neighbors and everybody around you because everybody had to look out for each other.
Yes. Yeah.
And she said, in a way, it was very good times.
Yeah.
They were not married very long,
Yes. And you realize what's important to you, and that family and that church and faith and some of the basic things are
Well,
important.
that's what Dad said. He said, as soon as the war started, within 3 weeks, almost everybody went back to church.
Wow.
They realized this is a serious business.
Yeah. Okay, Uncle Jerry, do you think you could tell me a story about rubber boots?
My dad, because of the type of work he did, he was often in wet fields working in rubber boots. And so he almost always wore rubber boots. And everybody in the village called him Willem Boot.
Ah,
Willem
okay.
Lees.
Okay, so that's where
And that's where he got that nickname. When I came back when we were going to be married, I had been here 2.5 years, and when I walked back through the village, they said, "Oh, they get here from Willem Lees. There's one from Willem Boot."
Okay.
That
That's
was me.
neat. Also, there was a story about a motorcycle. Could you share that one?
My dad, because of economics, drove a motorcycle. He, like when they, especially when they started to work in the polder, the Northoost polder, which was about maybe 100 kilometers, a little more from where we lived, and they did a lot of custom work there. For transportation, for him to just personally go there and back, and he was the boss, he had men working for him there, he bought a motorcycle.
Okay.
And he loved driving a motorcycle.
Okay.
First motorcycle he got was from the army dump. It was a Harley Davidson,
Wow.
a 1200 cc. It had even a reverse gear on it because that's what the army issue had, because when they got into a hole they had to be able to back out.
Yeah, that's right.
And so yeah, he used it even sometimes on the field. He used to drag harrows with it just for when there was nothing else to pull it, because the thing was just like a tractor.
Wow.
But he had later on different motorcycles from time to time, and we had some harrowing experiences. Of his children, only the younger ones ever drive motorcycle, because the older ones are deadly afraid of motorcycles.
Really?
Because Dad had too many close calls.
Ah.
And when with the one motorcycle that he had his brother on the seat behind him, and we were coming through a little village, and the farmer in the village was just pulling a load of hay up into the barn with a long rope with 2 horses on it, and the rope was across the road.
Oh no.
And so they just stopped in time, and they just got the rope in their chest, but they didn't get knocked off the motorcycle.
Oh my goodness.
Although Dad did have an accident, serious accident with a motorcycle once, and ended up in the hospital.
Who was that?
My dad.
Your dad? Okay.
My dad got in a motorcycle accident.
Did he ever get it on
Because of-
again?
He did. He got on it
Okay.
again, but it was just because the roads were slippery, muddy, and slippery from mud on the roads.
Okay.
And the worst that he had was that one time he drove. It was foggy weather, and there was 2 policemen on bicycles. And as he passed them, they started hollering, and he heard that and he stopped because he thought there's a problem and they need me.
Yes.
And when he stopped, they gave him a ticket because he didn't have his headlights on, and it was a bit foggy. And in Holland in those days, you had to have your headlight on
Okay. Yeah.
when it was foggy weather.
Oh.
So he said he should have never stopped. But
That's
he did.
right.
Right.
Probably a better idea he did. But mind you, they couldn't
When
have caught
he
up,
first,
right?
when he first got the motorcycle, he was very excited about it, and he would take my mom on the back,
Oh.
and all of our kids would be watching and listening, so that he made the tour through the different villages and come back. We could hear him all over because it made so much noise.
So they could do mischief until they could hear them close to the bend, and then they'd clean the house up and stuff like that.
Well, no. Like we could. It was just maybe on an evening after supper,
Oh, okay.
because Mom would normally never go out on a boat. But things come. Supper was finished. We all sat outside. It was a summer evening, and
Yeah.
Mom would go for a little ride with Dad, but not far enough away that she couldn't keep an eye on things.
Yes. Okay.
But maybe 10 kilometers, but we could hear the motorcycle the whole trip.
Okay. Neat. Did any of the boys ever take the motorcycle out for joyride or anything? Or?
What happened was there was a different motorcycle. It was a lighter version, and it had to go to the repair shop. And we came home from school, and we were told push this motorbike home,
Well,
which was about a kilometer.
Yeah.
So Ted sat on it, and Fred and me pushed it.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, Ted let it go,
Yeah.
and it started, and he took off, and he drove home. And we had to walk, of course.
I was just going to say he left you in the dirt. Did he get in big trouble?
No,
No?
no big trouble, except that the policeman saw him. He said that may not happen again,
Oh,
but we didn't get that problem.
okay. I'm just going back a little bit again to Paca. What kind of town did he grow up in? Was it a small town, or was it near where you lived as a child? Or
Actually, my dad born in the same town as what we grew up later on.
oh, really? And where was that?
That was Chimaram.
Chimaram. Okay.
Yeah, did you want to see a picture of it?
We'll actually go to that in a bit. Were there any particular customs or interesting stories about the town you grew up in and your father grew up in, or like did people wear the kerchief
No, they did
hats
not.
or
They
anything?
did not have the different dress mode.
Okay.
But no, where Dad was born was in a house off a little alley, and
Okay.
the house actually was in the alley behind the store. On the corner of the street, like facing the main street, was a store, and where my my park at Beppe, Dad's mom and dad rented,
Okay.
was in that alley. That's where Dad was born.
Okay.
And later on, they moved to where we were born, which was called the Molenpolle, the Mill Hill.
Okay.
At one time, there was a windmill there for making grain, like
Yes.
making flour out of grain and that
Mhm.
kind of stuff.
Yep.
And actually, the mill had been burned years and years before.
Huh.
And the old millstone,
Mhm.
it was still there. It was behind the barn. As you step out of the barn, you'd step on the millstone.
Ah.
And that was a kind of a nice stoop.
Neat.
Yeah,
Huh.
the Molenpolle,
What was the language of the area?
Frisian.
Frisian. Okay.
They all spoke Frisian.
Did you also learn Dutch, and did he grow up learning Dutch as well? or-
Yeah, and it was that way already for many, many years. The language of the country
Mhm.
is the Dutch language.
Mhm.
And Friesland is a province of Holland,
Mhm.
and the Frisians speak Fries,
Mhm.
Frisian at home.
Mhm.
The problem is, when you go to school or church, it's all done in Dutch.
Okay.
And so it didn't take long to learn Dutch, but of course the first while you hear some real broken Dutch, half Frisian.
Yes. Yeah.
And later on, when the Frisian people would, for instance, be of the age that they would have to go into the military,
Mm.
the people, other parts of the country, right away knew which was a Frisian by birth.
Yes. Okay.
Because you always have some ways of saying things or some accent.
Okay.
As you can hear my accent,
Yes.
you know.
I wouldn't be able to differentiate, but was there some kind of any kind of racial issues again? Not racial, but did you feel different, or were you persecuted at all in little ways for being Frisian?
We felt very superior.
Superior.
No, I'm only kidding. I'm only
Okay.
kidding. But we did, like the Frisians and the Dutch have always been a little bit at battle.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just like perhaps the Canadians and the Quebecers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay.
The story goes, if you study history, that all that area from Denmark through Germany, through Groningen, through Friesland,
Mm-hmm.
and big part of Holland, all the way Belgium to the French coast,
Yep.
was at one time when the Romans were there or before,
Mhm.
Friesland, the whole large area,
Okay.
and because of that, and of course they got crowded in upon and on all the time more and more,
Mm-hmm.
and they lost many battles, but
Yep.
that's why the Frisians they've always felt that they were a different
Mhm.
nation or a different
Entity or whatever.
entity, yeah.
Okay.
And that stays with the people. Not that they
Mhm.
felt superior,
Mhm.
but there's always been a difference. And even now,
Yeah.
they can do a whole lot of things in their own language,
Okay.
which is a definite language. The Frisian language is a language just as well as the Dutch is a language.
Mm-hmm.
The Dutch is Germanic, the Frisian is Anglo-Saxon.
Okay. Ignorance.
I read something the other day that says that the Frisians were there before the Anglo-Saxons were,
Hmm.
and that they crossed over to England,
Okay.
and that's where the language came from.
Huh. Interesting.
So,
How old, this is just a complete aside here, but my husband continually comments about Beppa's koek and how it's a very old recipe. How old would you estimate Beppa's koek recipe would be?
I do not know.
Okay, he claims it's a couple 1,000-year-old.
Oh,
but-
I have no idea. I don't know how old it might be, but I know my wife makes it just the same and
Okay.
probably better.
Okay.
But yeah, in the wartime, of course, there wasn't many ingredients.
That's right. Well, there's no eggs in it, so at least you can
But
make it during the war.
My mom made, yeah,
Mhm.
but my mom made lots of stuff all the time through the
Oh.
war too.
Oh, that's good.
But it was very primitively done.
Yes.
And during the war, there was no sugar.
No. Oh, no.
And so you had to cut sugar beets and slice them up and then cook them and cook them and cook them till you finally got something that looked like syrup.
Oh.
It tasted totally differently.
I bet. I bet. What was some of the sort of work history of Paka's ancestors? Was there farming in the background, or was it different?
Yes, there was farming, but my dad's grandparents, they were just farm laborers.
Oh, okay.
And I know that my dad's mom's dad, he was they call him a koetsier, like for the horses, like at a big estate, he would be the coachman.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That was his occupation.
Okay, so he would drive and take care of
He
the
would
horses.
drive and take care of
and-
the horses, and
Okay.
that was his job. And he was already elderly when he still worked for the same man,
Mhm.
but because he wanted to go to church on Sundays and the man's boys
Mhm.
wanted to have him ride them around all over the country on Sundays,
Oh.
they fired him in the middle of winter, and him and his wife, so that's my dad's mom's father and mother, they moved into town in the middle of the winter. They got a little house from the church to live in,
Wow.
but they were put out because of their
Faith, yeah.
Faith, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're going to switch over to Beppa now. Can you tell us a little bit about Beppa's parents? Their names, a little bit of their background.
My mom's dad's name was Jelle,
Mm-hmm.
just like me.
Okay.
I'm named after him, and his wife's name was Liefke.
Mhm.
My sister Lucy's named after her.
Okay.
Paka was, he was a young man, but I'm not sure how old exactly. He must have been in his late 20s when he married Beppa.
Mhm.
Beppa Liefke, my mom's mom, she had had the Spanish flu when she was 18 or 17, and she was totally deaf. But
Okay.
because she had been able to hear and speak, she continued to speak, and she could learn to read lips.
Oh, very good.
And when they were married, she came, and along with her came her 14-year-old brother. He had no other place to go. He was also deaf from the Spanish flu.
Wow.
And with her came her husband, her father, Paka Klaas,
Mm-hmm.
into the marriage because he was old and he couldn't work anymore.
Okay.
And with Paka Jelle came his dad. So
Wow.
they had the two old men and a young 14-year-old boy living with them.
Yes.
Beppa Liefke was only 19 when she died, when she married.
Okay.
But the reason was that she needed help,
Mm-hmm.
and marriage was not always based on the things that we now seem to base it on.
Mm-hmm.
There was a need, and there was also they really learned to love each other. They were an
Yes.
excellent couple.
Yes.
My mother has said, we've never heard our parents raise their voice to each other. Not that it would have helped much anyway, because Beppa was deaf.
Yeah.
But they could still get, a little bit
Angry.
excited,
Yeah.
But there was not that way.
Wow. What did Beppa's father do for a living?
He worked for a farmer
Mm-hmm.
during the day. He also rented a little bit of land from that farmer so that he could grow his own crop a little
Mhm.
bit. And then he would, of course, have the cost of renting land. He would also have the cost of using a horse from the farmer
Mm-hmm.
and maybe the little plow or whatever tool he needed.
Yeah.
Plus, he would likely buy the potatoes or whatever he was going to grow
Mhm.
from the farmers
Mm-hmm.
and fertilizer or manure, whatever it needed.
Yeah.
And then when all was said and done, then when the product was ready,
Uh-huh.
it would go back through the farmer to the market.
Okay.
And often enough, he worked a whole year for nothing on those things.
Wow.
Like he worked for his daily wages, all
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But that extra work
Mm-hmm.
often didn't mean nothing. Like it would mean a lot of work, but no income.
Yep.
And when the farmer would come in the fall of the year to settle things up, he would
Mhm.
come to Paka and Beppa's house.
Yes.
But then Beppa would have to stand in the hallway because she could, even though she couldn't hear, but she was not allowed to be in the room there because things were done so different. And it was a men's world.
Yes. Yes.
And anyway, then the kids would come home from school and say, "What are you doing here in the hallway?" Well, she says, the boer, the farmer is talking to Paka,
Ah, okay.
and he can't interrupt,
Yes. Wow.
Anyway, but beside that,
Mm.
he would also be the town grave digger,
Okay.
and he would also go, when it was suitable weather, onto the sea just off the shore of Holland for fishing. And so did a whole lot of people in the village.
Okay.
They would go fishing and through the night, and they
Wow.
would catch different kinds of fish.
Mhm.
And when the catch was plenty, all the kids would have to just bring them from house to house in the morning before
Oh.
school. When the catch was good,
Mhm.
the price was bad. When the catch was bad, the price was good. It
Yes.
always evened out.
Yes. I thought someone was a pastor. Was not Beppa's father a pastor at all?
No, he wasn't. But I'll tell you what
Thinking
it's about. Paka Jelle was a godly man.
Mhm.
The reason that he, like even the way, even from the beginning, from his marriage, he was a man. He was highly regarded as a church member and as a man influential in the church.
Mhm.
But especially as he got older, he had a lot of wisdom. He was a quiet man,
Mhm.
and when people in the village would come to the end of their life or got very sick or whatever, no matter what church, whether from the Reformed, Christian Reformed, or no church,
Yes.
they would ask, could he please come by? Because he talked to them about Jesus and
Interesting.
would pray with them. Because you see, there was such a caste difference between the pastor or the doctor and common people.
Yes.
Whereas
yeah.
they needed a man like Paka Jelle
Okay.
that they could talk with and trust him. And he did a lot of good. And I know that when he died, he had picked a song that I heard about, and a song that spoke to us too when we got saved.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in Dutch, but I'll just translate it a little bit. A sinner? No sinner anymore. A saved person, and that's in the song in Holland. Een zonder, een verlastelijkheid, en nu geen zonde meer. No sinner anymore. And that was his favorite song. He said, I'm not a sinner,
Yes.
I'm a saint.
Yeah.
And he was a saint. He was a, I still remember him when we were kids, because I was probably 8 or 9 years old when he passed away. But I still remember him often just walking on Sunday afternoons in the room back and forth, reading out loud from the Psalms or from the Bible, quoting.
Neat. So he had time for you guys too and stuff to be a part of the
Yeah,
family.
yeah.
Love it. What was Beppa's upbringing a little bit like? Where was she born?
My mother was born in Oosterburen, which is the next village, 2 kilometers from where my dad was born.
Okay, so it was also Frisian.
Separate, in Friesland. Yeah. My mom was, as a young girl, already started working for a farmer's wife, and one of the first things was she was just hired as a maid.
Yes.
And that was just common in those days. 11 years old.
Wow.
She would start working for this lady, and so anyway, she always started at 7 in the morning. And actually, school was over whenever it was, and then she would already go there, sometimes before school and sometimes after school. But when she was through school, she started full-time, 7 o'clock in the morning for the lady.
Wow.
And this lady said after a little while, it was fall and it was cold, and they needed Brussels sprouts. But the farmer and his wife and family were still eating breakfast. So this girl came in. So the lady says, just go to the field and take a couple pails with you and start picking the sprouts. And my mom did that.
Yes.
But it was so cold. And it was the Brussels sprouts were really frozen onto the stalks. And her dad came by on the bicycle going to his work.
Yes.
And he says, you may stop that now. You may walk back to the farm and say, my dad says, you do not have to pick sprouts. And that is a story my mom often told. This lady that she worked for later became a good friend of her, though.
Okay.
She
didn't get fired, obviously, then?
No, not at all.
Okay.
And when we came to Canada, these people had then immigrated to the United States. And we went and we saw them sometimes.
Oh, neat.
So, yeah, that was good.
So you kept some connections.
My mom grew up and she always had a lot of headaches. She always had, all her life, a lot of headaches. And she was not a strong person as she was young.
Okay.
When she was expecting a baby, she never had headaches.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, good thing she was pregnant a lot then.
Yeah.
Who was Beppa named after? Her name was Sylvia, so who was she named after?
Yeah, Beppa Sijke. That would be her mom's mother's name.
Okay. And when was she born?
My mom was born on November the 21st of 1915.
Okay.
Dad was born on March. Mom was born on the 15th of November, 1915. Dad on the 21st of November in 1911.
Okay. So not too much of an age gap between them.
No, 4 years.
Okay. Good. What was Beppa like growing up as a child? Did she talk about her youth, or was she mischievous, or was she quiet, or was she shy?
They were quiet. They were quiet. Her and her older sister, they chummed around together a lot.
Okay.
And they did a lot of little jobs for different neighbor ladies and all that. But don't forget, school for her was only till 11 years old.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
And then she started working full time.
Yeah.
That was not too much of a youth. But she did say that when they were really small, they would play on the stoop, skipping ropes and and going through the village. Yeah. Also, there was a neighbor there who was a baker, and between the two of them, her sister and her sister was a year older, they would often bring the bread to the close by villagers, people in the village, to customers close by.
Yeah. So. Would they get any treats themselves, or?
Oh, I don't know. It was those days were poverty.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, but they always had enough to eat, and it was peaceful at home.
Okay. Was there a bit of a difference in Paka's upbringing and Beppa's upbringing as far as affluence went?
I think perhaps maybe my dad's family was a wee little bit better off because they were more often a little bit more self-employed as farmers.
Okay.
Whereas Jelle, my dad's dad, it was, they didn't get a lot of income in those days. That's why he worked so hard at a lot of different things too.
Mm-hmm.
But they never went completely without,
Yes.
you know, like a lot of people. It was not, those were tough days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those were hard days.
Yeah. Okay.
Mom and Dad's engagement picture. And Dad would have been 24 and Mom would have been 20.
Okay, and how long were they engaged for?
I don't really know. Not long.
Okay, all right, thank you.
That was the wedding picture. When my mom and dad got married on the 20th of May, I think, was it Tini? 20th of May?
Yes.
Of 1936. They had the wedding in the church, of course. And in Holland, of course, you first have to go to the Justice of the Peace, which is in the community hall. And like where, what do you call it? The civic hall.
Yes.
Anyway, then from there you go to church, and in church you get the blessing. It was not always done on the same day.
Interesting.
For Mom and Dad, they after that had the party at my mom's parents' house, just in the living room, and just a very few people, only immediate family, were there, and they had one big cake that one of the ladies had brought, and that's all they had. Just
Wow, no presents or anything like that.
present. No, there was no gifts. You didn't do that in those days. But look at the nice bouquet of flowers here.
Very nice.
Look
Was
at
there
the nice
anything
dark
special
dress.
about their dresses or anything, or their outfits?
Nothing
or?
special.
No?
It was just their Sunday's clothes, best Sunday's clothes, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, okay.
And
Neat, all right.
Dad did custom work. He worked for a lot of farmers, and after the war in the village, he was the first man that bought a tractor. There was very few tractors in those days. This here little bulldozer, Alice Chalmers HD5, was the first one after the war in the whole area.
Wow.
It was a tractor with like tracks. It was a caterpillar, like Tybiel.
Yes.
And they pulled here 4 furrows with it, but when they went to the polder, they would pull two plows like that with it, make long, long rows.
Wow.
This, incidentally, was the tractor that ran over my little brother, who was 4 years old,
Wow.
who was out with his dad, because it was his birthday, and he could just go along for the ride. And what happened was they had to do some work. They had to pull something out of a ditch,
Mm-hmm.
and the boy got off. Some other little boy was supposed to watch him, 15-year-old boy, but the little fella slipped away, and he got on the track while Dad was turning around, and he got on the outside track and got taken right over to the front, and his head got under it, and he was killed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and after that, Dad sold this tractor pretty well right away. We got different ones since, but he didn't want to have
No, the
reminder.
memories. No, of course not. This is going back, but would it have been very expensive? Like you said, it was one of the first ones at the time.
I don't know how expensive it was, but I know that all of Europe benefited by the so-called Marshall Plan in those days,
Okay.
which was from the States,
Yes.
where the United States helped all those people that had war setbacks, helped them a lot to get back on their feet.
Yeah.
And this, like, they got some of the dollars for even to buy this tractor. This here is typical little Frisian farms.
Okay.
This is the back end of the farm. In the building on this side there's a large door, and it's a thatched roof,
Yes.
straw. And then on this side, the inside would have the hay mow, and the little door is where they would have the stables. 2 rows of cows with the heads to the outside, and then in the front part they would have the house. The house was part of the whole building,
Interesting. Okay.
and it kept it nice and warm. No
Yeah,
heating
you have
bills.
less on the outside. That makes sense. Okay.
The house that I was born in, and we lived on the first side of the house. Beppe Anne, my dad's mum, lived on the far side of the house, and up through that window at the top, that's where our bedroom was, and then the girls were on the far side at the back. As you can see, there's a big dormer there too. There was a fairly large room upstairs.
Yeah.
This was the barn behind the house, and that's where Dad had all his machinery, and later on that he needed to be inside.
Yeah.
But before that, there was just a storage area, and then there was cattle, like cows, milking cows and that kind of stuff.
Now,
Pigs.
could you hear them while you were trying to sleep? All this
No,
blowing,
no.
or?
Our house was attached, but it was still separated by a wall.
Walls, okay.
Whereas in some older farms, they had the whole thing open to the back so that they wouldn't have to heat the house.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
These here were all the tractors that we had at the
Yes.
day of the sale
Wow.
when we were selling. They were just standing there in a row.
And I see a
and,
car there. What kind of car was that?
And that was an old panel truck.
Okay.
1938 truck.
Okay.
Like that old Chevy.
Wow, and we'll just interject the next photo. This is this
This
current
is-
day or?
This is the way it is now.
Okay.
This is after we left for Canada, and then the man that bought that, he made a pension out of it. Like it's like a
Yes, a bed and breakfast
bed and
type
breakfast
thing.
type thing.
Okay.
And he built a whole new shed behind it, and all these are different rooms at the back.
Wow.
And both sides, and then in the middle is a storage area where he stores campers and boats and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, very neat. Okay.
This is in the village where we were born, which is Tjumarem. And this is the Dutch Reformed Church, the Grote Kerk, the big church. And the steeple, it's still from the Roman Catholic time, because it was built probably in about 1400. And of course, with the Reformations, all those churches were no longer Catholic because a lot of them went through the Reformation to the Reformed type churches, right? The center part is the Christian Reformed Church, and the pastor's parsonage is that. And this here is where the principal of the Christian school is, and the school is right behind here through a little alley that we can't see.
Oh, interesting.
My wife and I were married in this church.
Ah.
That's her church. That's where she used to go.
And what denomination was that?
Christian Reformed.
Christian Reformed. Okay.
Christian Reformed.
All right.
This is an aerial picture of the village that my mom came from.
Wow.
And
How many people would have lived there?
1800 at the most.
Wow.
About 1800 people. I just can't see exactly where it is. Oh, this is down the village, yeah. We can't see their house on here at all because it's actually on this end behind here.
Okay. What was the name of the village again?
Oosterberum.
Oosterberum. Okay. All right.
Okay, this is where my dad's dad and family originally lived. Because after Dad was born in Tjumarem, the whole family then moved to Seksbirum. And this is where Uncle Sama now still lives.
Huh, okay.
This is our family as we were just about ready to leave for Canada. We had this whole family picture taken. It was in all the papers in Holland because a family with 13 kids was leaving to go to Canada.
Yes.
That was me there.
Wow.
And yeah,
That's really cute.
yeah, that's your dad, John.
Aw.
And so this was done on an evening. We had been working all day and we had to really rush to get changed quickly, get our tie on and Sunday clothes on.
Yes.
And matter of fact, we never went home. We dressed up at the photographer's
Okay.
studio because we come by there. We were with tractors and wagons hauling sugar beets to the boats.
Wow.
And Ted and I were both on a tractor. They brought the clothes along. We quickly had to change.
Yes.
And then this was taken just before we left, about a week or maybe a little longer before we left to go to Canada.
Wow. Neat.
This was our wedding. Look at how sleepy we look. It was in the church. The lighting was real poor. Both my grandma, this is my mom's mom and that's my dad's mom. They were both there because they had to be there because I was only 20. And in Holland in those days, you had to be 21 to be married at your own recognizing.
Yes.
And so when I came to ask for the permit, they said, "You're too young.
Yeah.
Where's your mom and dad?" I said, "In Canada." "Are they coming?" I said, "No." They said, "Well, they got to be here."
So you couldn't
I
just
s-
elope then.
You could not do that. And I said, "Well, I have two Beppes here. Will that do?"
Yes.
He said, "One of your moms and the other here." I said, "That's right." So they said, "All right." So I had to go get them. They had to sign for me, and then we could get married. And there they were, both of them.
Yeah.
This is Beppe Lief because she was deaf since the age of 18, totally deaf. But
wow.
she could read lips. If we would bicycle past her place, she'd be by the window, and we would just mouth to her, "We're coming for tea," and she would have tea ready in 15 minutes.
Isn't
with
that
tea.
neat, eh?
That was Beppe Anne, my dad's mom. She was good lady, stern. She later in life developed Alzheimer's, and yet when my wife and I came to Holland one day, she came out with an old picture of my dad who looked at one time somewhat like me.
Yes.
Or I looked like him, I suppose.
Yes, yes.
And she came out with that picture and she laughed and laughed. So she could see the resemblance.
That's neat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, here's the pictures of the two Beppes again. The far one is my mom's mom, and that is just the way she sat. And so I really know her like that because the coffee pot in front of her, the creamer there on the table, the cup there, and obviously she's just sitting there relaxed. That's her. That's a silhouette of her brother standing there, who lived with her all his life. He never married.
Wow.
He was 14 when they got married, when my Beppe got married,
Yes.
and so he came along with the marriage.
Okay.
And this is Beppe Anna, my dad's mom, signing for us at the wedding, because both these ladies had to sign for me.
And thankfully she did. All right.
Yeah, this was our wedding picture. And I still thank the photographer for leaving the light on above our head there,
Yes.
because that kind of spoils every picture.
That's okay.
But there was our day, our big day.
Yep.
January the 15th of 1959 in Holland. There was about 4 inches of snow on the ground. We rented a big bus to take us from the church to the civic hall and back, and then to the place where we had the party.
Yes.
And as we're on this subject, we had rented everything that we needed to have the party in the little church we used to go to. And the following morning, the two of us went there and cleaned everything up, washed all the dishes, returned all the rented stuff,
Wow.
paid all the bills, and that was our honeymoon.
Ah, hoe is mogelijk?
Yeah.
What was the church that Paka and Beppe went to as they were a young couple?
My mom went to the Reformed Church, which is the Netherlands Hervormde Kerk in Holland, in the village that she grew up, which was, in a way, the state church. But in Holland, after the Reformation, there was a whole lot of different things happened. And in the village that my dad lived, Chemarum, there was the Reformed Church was modern, a modern church, liberal. And they
What was liberal about it?
liberal was that they believed generally the Bible, but not specific.
Okay.
And they did not. It was theism. It was more humanism.
Okay.
Like the focus was not on salvation in the standard state church. That's also why the Christian Reformed Church in those days, or a little bit before, split away from the Netherlands and from the Kerk.
Okay.
The thing was, though, there were some people in the Reformed Church that said, it's still our church, and they owned all the land, they owned all the buildings, they owned, the church did, you know, they owned a whole lot of property, but the members of the church really owned it, of course, because they're part of the church. And they said, rather than letting it all go, we'll wait for the day that things change in the church, and being more specific about the faith in the Bible and in Jesus, they said we can no longer endorse the doctrines of the church, but we won't split away. So they became a segment of the Netherlands Hervormde Kerk, the Reformed Church, that was separate, and they gathered in a little hall somewhere in the village. They were separate from, but it was a little evangelical church. It did eventually become a denomination because they never did get the Reformed Church back until in the 1960s. And then everything was watered down in all the things, and it all became one big church again.
Okay.
They're working on that now in Holland, to make the Lutherans and the Christian Reformed and the Reformed all one denomination again. But they've forgotten that it takes the Lord to make us one. And now they're all doing it in man's power. But my grandparents, they were, with a whole lot of people in the village, the forerunners of the evangelical movement in the Reformed Church.
Interesting. Okay.
The sad part of it is, though, that many of them, at least some of them, didn't get saved. But that happens in any church.
Yeah.
But the reason being that they often majored on the doctrines and things and on the law, but not on the life,
Yes. Yeah.
the experience.
The freedom. To Paka and Beppe and just their whole love story. Where did they meet? Because they were from different villages, and where would they have initially met and courted? And
the villages were all close together, and pretty well everybody knew everybody in at least a few surrounding villages.
Yes.
Now, I do not know exactly how my mom and dad met.
Okay.
I know that my mom never had a boyfriend before, but I think that my dad had maybe 1 or 2 dates before with different people.
Okay.
He never admitted too much about that, though. But when they did meet, they didn't go together long, and then they got married.
Really?
That was very common in those days.
Like
They
under a year, or
I don't know. I really don't know.
Okay.
I don't remember. No, I don't know that.
Okay.
I do know that when they got married, at that wedding is when Uncle Frank and Moik Anne Morgana's my mother's oldest sister.
Yes.
And Uncle Frank, my dad's oldest brother.
Mhm.
They met for the first, well, they met then, and they got married a year later.
Okay, okay. So Beppa and Paka were married first, and
Yeah.
then a year later.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there any opposition to Paka and Beppa's marriage? Did either of their parents not agree, or appreciate the other as well?
I don't think there was any problems.
No. Okay.
I do know that because of Beppa Anna, she was probably a little bit more reluctant because of the background of, like, she figured that they were farmers
Yes.
and that my mom's parents were actually just workers, laborers.
Okay. So
There
there's
was
a bit of a
little
difference.
hesitancy from her side, but not from my dad's side.
Okay. All right.
But I've heard that story once.
Okay.
So-
Were the in-laws, were the families relatively close to each other? Like, did they do any functions together or anything, or was it pretty
No,
separate?
they were similar people though.
Okay.
Like the customs in all these things are a lot alike.
Yeah.
And but no, there was no opposition. I know that they got married. My mom and dad got married in my mom's the wedding party in my mom's parents' living room,
Oh, okay.
like we already said before.
Yes. Yeah. And I think you'd said
You
too
would
that
always
there were.
get married in the church or in the place where the girl lives.
Okay.
That was a common custom in those days.
Okay. All right.
You always go to the place where the girl comes from, not to
Mhm.
the place where the boy comes from.
Okay. Interesting.
Um,
I think you had said actually there weren't any wedding gifts at all,
There
just
was-
other just a cake.
I do not know of anything that they got as a wedding gift,
No,
and I've
okay.
never heard.
Ah.
But there may have been some little things.
Okay. Yeah. There just wasn't money there for it. so. Okay, we're moving on to the de Vries family years in Holland. What was Paka like as a father when you were growing up in Holland?
Dad was a good man.
Mm-hmm.
He was a busy man because he had a lot on the go all the time. He ran a busy business
Mm-hmm.
and he was away a lot.
Yeah.
But he was a fun man. He was always, although he could he could rattle off a whole lot of little complaints, but it was never really serious. He always
Okay.
had a smile behind everything, and
Yeah, okay.
he was a good father.
Yeah. Good.
He would run after us sometimes because we would frustrate him sometimes, And
Okay.
he was not always a very patient, long-suffering man.
Okay.
But I remember one thing of my dad very clearly.
Mm.
You could ask him any question about any subject and you'd get an answer,
Ah, that's
you
good.
know?
Yeah.
And it was always a clear, as best as he knew. If he knew the answer, he would tell you the answer, no matter what the
Yeah.
subject.
Okay.
And I knew that.
Good. What about your mother? What was she like when you were growing up?
Well, Mom was she had a lot of headaches.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And she had a lot of tensions. Don't forget, there was no electricity in our house ever. We only had one tap. It was from the city water.
Yes.
Only cold. There was no hot water.
Oh,
All the cooking had to be done on a wood stove in the house.
yeah.
So in the summertime it would be extremely hot.
Yes.
And all the wash and everything, the water had to be boiled in the house. She almost always did have a girl working for her to help her as
Oh, an
Well,
outside person.
an outside person. There was always a young lady that it has at different times with different people.
Yes.
The one was my mother's sister for a few years, and another one a sister of my dad for a few years. But we had one girl. She started for us when she was probably about 14,
Wow.
and she stayed till she's married.
Wow.
And,
Were these people would have been paid or fed or?
They were paid.
Yeah.
They went. If it wasn't a relative, then they did not stay home overnight,
Yes.
but they went to their own home, which was only a couple of kilometers away anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
But the girls that were relatives, they stayed usually.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You talked a little bit about what their house was like in Tremarm already. Did it not seem like it was bursting at the seams though with all those children? Like how many siblings did you grow up with, or did you have?
When we went to Canada, there was 13 children,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them had been the one that died, so there could have been 14.
Yes.
We never felt real crowded,
No. Okay.
but we often slept, as when I was a young boy, with 3 boys in one bed,
Yes.
and then 2 double beds in the same room, so 2 more boys in the other bed.
Yes.
And then there was upstairs, and there was another room that was for the girls, and there's 4 girls that slept there.
Uh-huh.
And then when Mom and Dad slept in a cubbyhole in the living room, you know how you had these
Hideaway beds.
hideaway beds, like they were behind doors.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one on the one side of the room, one on the other side of the room, all on one wall, and in between was a closet door. That's where the cupboard was. That's where they kept all the groceries and everything. That was the pantry, right?
Ah.
All the homes were pretty well the same.
Yes.
And in the cubbyhole where Mom and Dad slept,
Mm-hmm.
they had at the foot of the bed a crib. where the baby slept. And in the
The
other
eternal crib.
And in the other cubbyhole bed,
Uh-huh.
but bedstay we call it,
Mm.
there would be 2 or 3 of the younger kids sleeping.
Wow.
And sometimes 4 with the feet to each other.
My goodness.
Yeah, that's how they did it.
That's
But you say, were you ever really crowded? We didn't feel that way. For us, it was
Yeah,
a normal
That's
family.
what you grew up with, yeah.
We grew up with a whole bunch of it.
Yes. What was the kids' school like? I think you'd said some of them went up to school until grade 11, or age 11. When you were growing up, did children still go only to
No,
age 11?
No, when I grew up, I even went to high school till 15.
Okay.
Finished high school in Holland.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And some of my brothers went to the agricultural high school, and they only went then 2 or 3 days a week,
Mhm.
depending on what week it was.
Yeah.
And
Was
so
that
they
kind of
did-
like a trade school then? or
like a
something?
trade school?
That
but
was after
but
high school?
That was after school.
Oh, okay.
After the regular school, if you finished 6 grades in public school,
Mhm.
then you could go to high school or to agricultural school.
Okay.
And that's what they did. Ted and Fred went to the agricultural school.
Okay.
My dad finished school, but not high school.
Okay.
My mom finished school, but she finished at age 11. She quit
Yes.
early.
Yeah.
But actually, that was allowed in those days. Actually, when we went to school, you had to go through grade 6, and then you didn't have to go. That was compulsory,
Yes.
but no
okay.
more.
Okay.
So after that, there was your own. And kindergarten, we did go to kindergarten. I went only for 1 year, but it was a bit of a trick because
I was going to say kindergarten isn't it only 1 year?
my mom was always had the kids at home. She had a very helpful sister, which was my aunt,
Yes.
which we didn't like all that much
Oh.
because she always took charge of things.
Okay.
And she said, because we used to visit Beppe often, even as little children, we just walked there. It was only about a 2-kilometer walk, but it's all along the same road,
Yes.
and wasn't much danger then. So we would go see Beppe Liefke, my mom's mom.
Mm-hmm.
And we get there, we get tea with a lot of milk and a lot of sugar and a wee little cookie, and then we'd spend a little time there and go back home.
Yeah.
But there was an aunt of mine that lived there all the time too. She
Okay.
was home with Beppe.
Yeah.
And she said, now if you come again, we have a nice surprise for you. And she enrolled me and Fred and Lucy, all 3 of us, in the kindergarten,
Oh.
kleuterschool, which of course we had to go there,
Okay.
but we didn't want to go. I mean, that was the biggest dirty trick they ever played on
Oh,
us.
that's just wrong.
So then I was only there for 1 year, and then school started.
Okay. Yeah.
And when regular school started, then of course there was a big thing. It was still in the war when I
Mhm.
went to school.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother Fred, when he went to school, he had been there once. He said, not coming again. I don't like it one bit. And so we had a very hard time dragging him to school.
I'm sure. Was it the image that I think of, like a one-room schoolhouse?
No, actually the school that we went to was a school met the Bible, like a Christian school.
Okay.
In the village there was a public school and a Christian school. And the Christian school was set up by people from the church.
Mm-hmm.
But because there was in the village, a large part of the village was people were Christian Reformed and the other part were Reformed.
Yes.
They did it all together. And actually my grandparents started that school. My dad's dad with other people from the village. They started that school.
Huh, neat.
And when my dad went to that school, he had to bring a quarter every Monday morning. That was the tuition.
Yeah.
The school was 2 rooms, right? In Friesland, yeah. And the one, maybe 3. Yeah, 3. The school met the Bible. The one was where the principal was. The other was the meester. That was the man teacher. And then there was one that was a woman teacher. She had the first 2 grades.
Okay.
And that's how 6 grades. And for people that did not go to any other school, and if they were not too smart, they could go through the 7th grade.
Okay. Wow.
And that's how school went.
Neat. How far away did you have to travel to school? Like, people always say, "Oh, I had to walk 3 kilometers in the snow," and
Both uphill. We went 1.5 kilometers
When okay, was it
Walking.
uphill or downhill?
walking.
Did the war affect how long kids were in school at all? Like, did any of
Well,
your siblings have to stop because of that?
Sometimes. If there was problems like raids or bombardments or something like that, then,
Okay.
we were let out of school. And in the school where my wife went, they had the soldiers there for some time, right? And so
Oh.
kids could not go to school because the soldiers had to
Were in
live up
the
there,
building. Oh,
interned in
okay.
there,
Okay.
in the school.
Wow. I know you talked a little bit about what Pocket did for a living already, working in the polders with his tractor
Yeah.
equipment. Did the older boys help much with the taking in the income or helping in his job as well?
Yeah.
Or?
Ted was already driving tractor and machinery when he was 12 years old.
Wow.
And he did it pretty well from then on all the time.
Yeah.
And because I went to the high school, I didn't start that early, but of course in the holidays we did.
Yes.
But when I was 15, I started to work for Dad full time.
Wow.
as soon as school was over.
Yeah.
And we work in the polder a lot.
Yeah.
And
Can you
it was-
describe a polder? I don't know what that
the
is.
polder is the area of Holland where they put a dike around it. It's low. It was not deep underwater anyway.
Mhm.
And it's all at the exits of at the mouths of rivers, and it's all slipped in like with clay, with dirt.
Okay.
So we put the dike around it, pump the water out,
Mm-hmm.
and that becomes land.
Reclaiming the land.
The reclaimed land,
Yeah.
or claimed land.
Mhm.
And so then they first dig the ditches through there, they sow reeds,
Mhm.
and after a while the ground settles,
Wow.
and then it just started working it as farmland.
Yeah.
And Dad was one of the first people that worked there. He worked first for the government, just plowing land,
Yeah.
whatever they could do.
Yeah.
And then after that, the people from our area would go there and grow potatoes,
Okay.
because it was very good soil for to grow potatoes, and
Mm.
potatoes was a well-paying crop. So
Okay.
these people would go there, and they'd rent land there, and they had those work camps in the polder. They're like army camps,
Okay.
and you have a room with 14 people, and everybody that wants to be there has to rent a space, a bed.
Mhm.
So Dad usually had about 4 or 5 people there, and he would rent an area, and when you worked there, you would go to the canteen, like to the kitchen, and because whoever's the youngest goes and does all the dragging the stuff around.
Okay.
In the morning, you go there quickly. You get a big canteen with coffee and one with tea.
Mm-hmm.
And at night you go there and you get your warm meals,
Mm-hmm.
and at night you also go get the bread. Every person that was there gets one loaf of bread,
Mm.
one package of sliced cheese, and one package of sliced summer sausage,
Okay.
and that's what you had to do for the day.
Wow.
And at night when you came, you could come there and you get a big pot of mixed food, like potatoes with sauerkraut, or potatoes with turnips, or with carrots, or whatever.
Yeah.
Always a one-pot deal.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. What about the girls? Did they grow up and have to work and give their checks to their parents, or
We all did.
y'all did? Okay.
We all
Until
brought-
what age?
Till we were married.
Till you're married. Okay.
We all brought the money home.
Mhm.
Because when we decided to immigrate, we did that all as a family. Dad it was new to us though, because although Dad had sometimes people from the village, lots of people had immigrated, we didn't regularly, at least not to my knowledge, talk much about it. Not until the last year when things started to solidify.
Mm-hmm.
And as it did, we then started to talk more about that.
Mhm.
And it was already we never made money in those days because we worked for Dad.
Mm-hmm.
But when we decided to go then Dad said, well, we're going to have to make a decision how we're going to do this, because for them to come here and have nothing and no income hardly,
Yes.
and then raise a big family, it would not be possible.
Yep.
So we made up our mind that we would come here and all of us would bring the money together
Mhm.
to help Dad get started again, which we did.
Yeah. Good. Very good.
And the girls too, when we came to Canada, we all started to working pretty well right away at the E.D. Smith canning factory.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get into that actually a little
Right.
bit later, but okay. Had many of the people in the village around you, had they immigrated yet, or were you one of the
No,
transiting?
we were not one of the
families?
first. There was quite a few people that had immigrated already.
Okay.
The village that we came from, Chimaram, how many percent of people left? 50, I think, eh?
Yeah.
About half the whole village immigrated through the years.
So what happened? All these homes are just empty, or did people move in?
People come from around and they fill them up
Okay.
again.
Okay.
People get married.
Did any of the children court or marry in Holland before you immigrated?
The two of us were together.
Okay. Yeah.
My wife and I, we had gone to school together, but then as we were almost knowing that we were going to leave, we got a little more serious, and after we left, we wrote letters for a year and a half, 2 years and a half, 2.5 years, right? And wrote back and forth. And,
Oh, so Antini was still in Holland then?
Yep, she stayed in
Okay.
Holland, and I went back after 2.5 years,
Got her.
and then we got married there. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, good. All right.
Yeah.
Can you talk about Uncle Ted being scared by a German soldier and shoveling something on him? Are you familiar with that story?
Is that the law?
I'm not.
Is
Well, that was me.
oh, that's-
That was
Okay,
me.
can you tell the story about you?
I remember that. It was wintertime, and my mom said, we've got to get some coal for the stove, which we would go upstairs, there was a loft, and that's where it was.
Hmm.
And I went and got some of the black coal
Mhm.
into the thing, and as I looked, it was a rainy day, and some of these German soldiers had entered the little barn where we were,
Okay, for
where
shelter.
the loft was,
Okay.
and it scared us really badly. or me at least. And I'm not sure if there's any of my brothers with it.
Okay.
But it was, I didn't drop the thing with the coal on them.
Okay.
But some of the coals did come down. And,
Yeah.
It was close.
Aw. It's funny.
And they were ordinary guys. Those, even the German soldiers, in many cases, were just ordinary people.
Mm-hmm.
And as kids, you have a bit of a terror of soldiers. I remember from the war, though, when they would be marching on the roads, they would sing beautiful. They always sing, all men, right? And they'd sing well. They were Germans, you know.
Yeah, okay. Can you talk about Uncle Frank, I think, Uncle Frank's potato farm where he hid Jews?
Well, yeah, but they hid Jews. They hid quite a few of them.
Okay.
I've heard that they hid 13 at times.
Wow.
But they
Where
hid
were they hiding?
Well, it was a farm. It was not a potato farm. It was a mix. They did grow potatoes too, but it was a mixed farming, and they had cattle. So they also had hay mows,
Oh, okay.
and they would dig a hole in the hay mow,
Mm-hmm.
and they would have secret entrances in there, and they would just hide the people in there. They hid some Jews too, and that is one of the reasons they ended up in the States, because they had this bone disease, and Canada would not take people that had problems.
Interesting.
And the States wouldn't either, except because they had hidden people, and especially hidden Jews. And there was somebody that knew that and said, told about that, and that's why they got permit to go to the States.
Okay.
But yeah, those were difficult days. Like we have had people in our house too in the wartime. One time, Dad went to the barber, because you go in Holland, you didn't usually cut your own hair and shave yourself. They went to the barber,
Yep.
and Dad come back and he said some things. And I was only a little boy, but I know that he talked about somebody coming. And a little while later, somebody came with a wagon, and there was something in the wagon, but it was a guy.
Okay.
It was an American or an English pilot that had been shot down, but he had been walking, and his feet were bloody. My mom bandaged up, cleaned up his feet, and bandaged them up again. And he had to stay till it was dark at night,
Mm-hmm.
and then somebody came and sent him on his way again. They took him by boat over the sea back to England.
Yeah. Wow.
Mhm.
Was there any other kind of resistance movement within your family in Holland? Or?
There was always resistance, but there was not a lot of things that were really open.
Okay. Overt.
I do know that Dad, because he had horse and wagons, he had custom work, he had to haul one time a tank full of gas to the bunkers of the Germans so that he could run their motorcycles
Okay.
and things.
Yeah.
But he didn't dare go himself because he figured he might keep him.
Yes.
So he sent one of the young boys that worked for him to go there. And
Okay.
he said, make sure that you make the tap leak all the way down there so that they wouldn't get all the gas.
Yes. Okay. Good. Can you talk about Uncle Sama's volunteering in the war? I guess he volunteered so he could.
He went to Indonesia.
Okay.
He didn't, he was too young for the war in Holland,
Okay.
for the 1945. But after the war, then because Indonesia was a Dutch colony and it wanted to become independent, and of course they wanted to suppress that because the colonies brought in a lot of money to the country, especially into some parts of the country, some type of businesses. And so they then asked for volunteers to go into the army to go to Indonesia.
Now,
and
why did
fight
he
there.
volunteer?
He did.
Yeah,
Well,
why
why
did
did
he?
he?
Mhm.
Adventure.
Adventure. Okay.
Adventure. It's a trip overseas. It's a trip to the tropics. You know.
Okay.
He was there for 3 years.
Okay. Did any of the other brothers volunteer, or was he
No,
kind
there
of
was
taking their
nobody at
place?
the
or-
age anymore.
Oh,
My
okay.
dad never did join the army. Uncle Frank did. He was in the army when the war broke out.
Okay.
Uncle Frank and Moikane, they were already married.
Huh.
And what he would do, he wasn't all that far away from home. And my Uncle Frank, he was with the horses.
Mhm.
He was a cavalry, but he was not a soldier that would ride the horses. He was to take care of the horses
Okay.
a lot. And him and another guy. What they would do, they would sneak out at night on a motorcycle from the army,
Mhm.
go home, sleep
Okay.
with the wife,
Ah.
and then go back early in the morning.
Yeah, you got it.
But what happened was, he was home one day and he was already in bed, and he said, I do not feel good about it. I don't feel good. And she says, you better go then. So he got back on the motorcycle. He barely got back to the barracks, and the war broke out.
Oh.
And if he had been not there,
Yes.
he would have been classified as a deserter.
Wow.
You know.
Wow.
But yeah, that's one of the experiences.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Uncle Sama was in Indonesia for 3 years, and he
Mhm.
saw a lot of problems there and a lot of, war,
Mhm.
because that was just in those days. It was always bush war, like people,
Mhm.
like snipers on the side of the road and that kind of
Okay.
stuff,
Yeah.
So it was difficult years for him.
Yeah. Did he ever write letters back home or anything?
He
or?
might have, but I've never seen any of them. I know that when he came back home was a big celebration because
Okay.
a lot of them didn't make it back home. You know?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
You mentioned the death of Lewa and just that was something that would have been hard for your family. Can you talk a little bit about that? How old were you when your brother died?
I was probably 9, almost 10.
Okay, and what
No, I
kind
was
of
just 10.
what kind of effect did it have on the family?
What happened was that afternoon, as this accident then happened, me and some of my siblings were in the field weeding because Dad always had some market gardening, and we were weeding on the field some vegetable plants or whatever. Field was a little bit away from home, and somebody came running and says, "You guys got to come home right away because there's a bad accident happened."
Yeah.
And so we went home, but nobody told us at first what happened.
Yes.
And anyway, after a little while, then we got the story that this little boy had been on the bulldozer, gotten on it and off it, and the head was crushed. Although we didn't know that at the time, we only knew then that he was probably dead, and later on that he was dead.
Okay. Yeah.
It was a terrible thing. It was probably by the time we got home, it was maybe 4:30, maybe 5 o'clock, because we went to the field after school. It was over. School was over at 3.
Yeah.
And so it was big turmoil, a lot of people there, and they didn't want kids on the way.
No.
Because, and I know for myself, when I heard that he was dead, it was terrible. Because at lunchtime when we had come home from school, we always had an hour and a half break for lunch from school.
Yeah.
That day, we walked home from school, and Josie, who was younger, she could just walk.
Okay.
She came to meet us with Leo and I think Jane. And he was whimpering and he was crying, but we all wanted to hold Josie's hands because she was so small she could just walk. She was so cute. And he was whimpering because nobody paid attention to him. Next thing I knew, he was dead. You know, and Mom said he had been a little cranky that day, and that's why she said, "I'll send him along with Dad," and then he
cheer him up.
changes his attitude a little bit. When we then heard the news that he was passed away, that bothered me a lot, that we hadn't been friendly to him at lunchtime.
Yeah.
And I remember I remember my response. I remember that I thought right away about death, dying, heaven, hell. And I went in a place by myself in the back of the barn and I prayed.
Yeah.
And I said, "Lord, I know that Job said when all the calamities came, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken,
away.
blessed be the name of the Lord."
Yes.
I remember I cried. And I remember I committed it to the Lord.
Yeah, that's good.
And I still remember exactly what the weather was, what the temperature was. It was nice, medium weather. Like it was not hot, wasn't cold, it was nice weather. Sun was shining.
Yeah.
And so anyway, then somebody come along, I'm not sure, one of the neighbor ladies or whatever, she says, "Why don't you all grab a piece of bread, go up to your bedrooms, because we can't have all these kids on the foot right now." Which we did. And I think all of us, 5 of us, like we were always with the 5 of us, the older ones, Ted, me, Fred, Lucy and Ann were all a lot together, and we were all upstairs. And we heard Mom crying downstairs. And what really spoke to me was that we didn't have a pastor. At least our pastor that we had was on holidays, so he wasn't there. And so the pastor from the Christian Reformed Church, he bicycled to our place. I saw him coming. We could see him from the room where we looked through the window. And he came on his bicycle and he went and talked to my mom. And later my dad came home and he talked to him too.
Yeah.
I know he pointed him to the Lord and prayed with him.
Yeah, that's good.
And anyway, then one thing that really spoke to me as we were, in our bedroom, like bored stiff and not knowing what to do, and all we had was just a bit of dry bread and some water to drink. That even nobody got supper because it wasn't done. And then Peppa Anna came up, which was my dad's mom, and she came up and she was really upset and frustrated and crying. I said to her, "Yes, Peppa, I know he's dead, but he's with the Lord. We'll see him again." And she said, "You haven't got a clue what you're talking about because he's dead."
Okay.
I said, "Yes, I know, but we will see him again." And then as she left later on after some talking, still really bad, upset, I said to my brothers, "She really doesn't believe it."
Yeah.
And that was my first inclination that there's more to even the religious life than what we often experienced.
Yeah.
You can edit it out, if you don't like it.
No,
you cut it out
that's
later.
wonderful. That's great. Were there any other farm accidents? Like, you've got a lot of equipment and stuff like that. There's always things that happen to
We
anyone
were one
else.
time on a fall day in the barn, in the shed, and in the shed was on the machinery was standing there backed in, the plow behind the tractor. Then on the side was a loft, and on top of the loft was a whole large pile of hay. And then on the top of that hay pile, which was right near the peak, we often, because it settles, so there was a space there. We often would play there. And there was a nice place, out of the way, dry, warm. And our brother Carl, he was there too, but he slipped and he got over the edge, and he, with a bang, just came down, bang, right that smack on the floor, with his arm here on the moldboard of a plow, and it opened completely up. And he was out, like he was out cold, he had a concussion.
Yeah.
So, and I was right there, it happened right in front of me. And at that time I was probably about 15, 16, 17 years old.
Yes.
So I picked him up, carried him in the house, and I got really blamed for doing it, but I didn't do it at all.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was one accident. And Dad had several farm accidents. He had one time that he had a machine that makes the sheaves, you know,
Yes.
binded.
Yeah.
And he, it was, and they were in the dark yet at night. It was late at night and it was already dusk, it was already dark, but as long as the crop was dry, it would still work.
Yeah.
And they always had customer, like they always had more than they could handle.
Yes.
And he was trying to reach something because it had to help it along a little bit, it was getting a little tough, and he reached wrong, and his hand got through a sprocket and chain,
Oh.
like that.
Yeah.
And till the day he died, he had a big
Ah.
cut there, big thing, and it was all
Gouge.
sewed up again, healed up again, but he never had feeling in his hand anymore
Wow. Okay.
after that. And I remember him in the hospital, and he had several motorcycle accidents, and where he ended up with broken legs and that kind of stuff. you
Oh.
know.
He was quite a trooper, it sounds like.
He was. He
Yeah.
bent off his fingers. They invented a new machine. A machine was to throw, when you in Holland grew potatoes, you had to make sure that you had a place where you could winterize them, where you keep them in the winter. What it would do is make a teepee type heap.
Okay.
Like, so they dig out first about a foot deep,
Yeah.
and they throw the dirt on the sides.
Yeah.
Then they put the potatoes in there. Then they put reeds around it, make a teepee.
Okay.
Then against the reeds, they throw that dirt back on.
Yes.
That's a lot of work. And that would keep the frost out, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And then the potatoes would stay then till it was time to sell them,
Yeah.
to ship them.
Yeah.
So Dad made a machine that would do that, so you didn't do it by hand. And
Wow.
they made a lot of money with that because that was a lot of good work.
Yes.
Paid well.
Yeah.
But they had hydraulic cylinders to lift it up and down, and then they would shove a pin in
Mm.
where it would stay so it would be at the right height.
Okay.
Of course, should have done it with a spring automatic, but he did it with his fingers.
Okay.
Cut 2 fingers off,
Oh, really?
just like
Wow.
that. And
Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
painful.
I'm
hard.
sure. Okay, we're going to move now to immigration to Canada. How many children immigrated to Canada?
13.
13. And what was, like I'm imagining, you know, you didn't all just go on a boat and move into your home. What was the arrangement of the building?
On the boat, there was separation, men and women not together. So
Okay.
the girls were in the area with mom, and we were in the area with dad.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't so bad. We all got quite seasick, except the younger ones.
Oh,
But every one of us, the bigger ones, had to take care of a sibling.
that's
My
very good.
charge was my brother Luke,
Okay.
and I had to keep an eye on him.
Was he
but
difficult?
He was not too difficult,
Oh,
except
okay.
those boys were young and they were not seasick and they had all kinds of adventure in their mind. And there was one day, and we were already well on the ocean, and there was a general alarm, and it was Luke with his legs over top of the lifeboat. The lifeboat is half over top of the ocean because
Yes.
only half of it over top of the ship.
Yes.
And here he was sitting on the tarp, on the edge of the
Uh-huh.
boat, with his feet 100
Dangling.
feet above the ocean, dangling. And somebody, one of the sailors, snatched him with a hook, like
Oh,
with
okay.
a thing that goes around.
Yep.
And picked him out there.
How long would the ride have been?
10 days.
10 days.
I
Okay.
think it was 9 days or 10 days. 9, I think.
Did you eat well? Was it like upper class or was it lower class or was it?
I do not remember much of the eating because I hardly ever ate.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think it was good food.
Okay.
I think it was probably easy food, but good food.
Were all the people, you know, from your village, or was it all?
No,
over
it was a general population from all over the country. Like there was even people from other countries on the boat.
Okay.
I think the boat held probably about 600 people.
600, okay.
immigrants,
All right.
Plus the staff of the boat.
Yes. Yep.
And it wasn't a touring ship.
No.
It was primitive.
Yes. Okay.
And it was very smelly because the whole boat's a lot of steam
Yes.
and a lot of oil, like a lot of fumes.
Mhm.
And
Did you all
so-
sleep in one cabin, or well, the
There
boys were
was-
separate from the girls, but
Yeah, but I don't think we were all in one cabin. I think there was 2 cabins. There were small cabins.
yes.
And, I don't really remember a lot of that. I know I was seasick, very seasick.
Okay.
My mom was all terrible seasick also.
Oh,
And a lot of people were. It was bad weather.
yeah.
It was in April. It was a lot of stormy weather.
Okay. Would you have had any kind of clue about how much it might have cost to actually immigrate? Like, I don't know if you can compare it to today, but, you know, like, did you guys go completely broke, or did you have to save for the year, or, you know, you said you were kind of discussing it ahead of time, or?
Dad had a business in Holland that he then had to dispose of. So a lot of the equipment was sold by auction. And when it's a forced sale and everybody knows you're leaving anyway,
You get it
you
cheap.
don't get a lot of money for it.
That's right, yeah.
So and they must have had a lot of debts too on all the equipment.
Yeah.
So and there was still a lot of people that owed Dad money.
Mhm.
So I don't think there was much money left over. First of all, in those days you couldn't immigrate and leave Holland with money. Holland didn't want that,
Oh,
and
Huh.
because they wanted to
keep the money in the country,
in the
yeah.
country. But you could take a certain amount, but Dad didn't. There wasn't much. I'm not sure how much would have been left,
Yeah.
but my guess would be no more than about $2,000 when we arrived here.
Okay, all right.
And then of course they had bought some furniture, put it in one large crate,
Okay, yeah.
and got that shipped over.
Yeah.
And we had some tools and small things,
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
Okay. Why did you choose to immigrate?
Well, one of the reasons we immigrated was one of the things Dad, I read that last night, yeah, too, in the piece that he said.
Mm-hmm.
He realized that as the family would grow and the different kids would marry, they would likely go here or there. Like some might go to Australia. Immigration in those days was a very popular thing because they were, for many reasons, they didn't think the economy would support all the people in Holland.
Okay.
Plus, there was a fear of communism in those days.
Yeah. Okay. And
Like
with the
Russia
war
wasn't too
and all
far
that.
away, and the war had just been over. Like, it's a
Yeah.
very bad experience.
Yeah, and there would have been extreme poverty, I'm
Holland-
assuming, after the war as well. And
And Holland had lost Indonesia, which was a
Yeah.
big source of income to the whole country.
okay.
So anyway, it was a whole lot of things together.
Okay.
Dad was a family man.
Mhm.
He wanted to keep the family as much as possible
Okay.
together so that you could still have a family. And he saw happening that one would go to Argentina, one to Canada,
Okay.
another one to the States, another one to Australia, New
Yeah.
Zealand.
Yeah.
And he said, before that happens, or anywhere else,
Mhm.
let's go together,
Okay.
which we did, and it turned out this way.
Was it really hard to leave family and friends? Like, there were other families still in Holland, I'm assuming. And
Yeah, there was a lot of family, but when you're young, you're full of adventure.
Yes.
And the worst was when I picked up my wife and we got married,
okay.
and Teeny's mom said later, I could have shot you.
Oh,
And I said, yeah.
taking
but,
my daughter.
you know, like to us, it was a novelty. It was an
Mm.
adventure. Like
Mhm.
you go out on this venture, you know,
Yes.
you're gung ho.
Yeah.
But later on, you sometimes think, oh boy, because immigrants, they leave the country of origin
Uh-huh.
and they never become totally integrated in the next country.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
there's always that you know,
Yeah.
you've lost your footing, your roots to a degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I came back, when we got married, that was only 2.5 years later. The boys that I had chummed around with,
Mhm.
they just act as if I had done them ill, like
Ah,
evil, because
okay.
it had nothing to do with me. The times had changed, they had changed,
Yeah.
we had different interests.
Yes. Yeah.
I clearly see, hindsight, that it was the Lord that moved us,
Okay.
because Holland went quite liberal after that, or even already in those days. A lot of things would just happen and people fall by the wayside, and
Mhm.
church diminished.
Mm-hmm.
And when we came here, there was a bit of a revival already starting in those days. You know, we had
Okay.
good church life in a way.
Yeah. Good. Who would you say it was harder for, Paka or Beppa to
Oh,
move? Beppa. Okay.
Oh, by far.
And in what ways?
Because she had absolutely nobody to talk to, whereas Dad would go to work.
Hmm. Did you any of you know English before you moved to Canada?
Well, we had gone to high school, so I knew some English, and
Mhm.
my sister Lucy.
Okay.
Plus, we had a tape recorder that had some tapes on it.
Okay.
But that's English.
Probably
you know.
primitive.
Yeah, but,
Yeah.
no, there wasn't much.
Okay.
Mom and Dad didn't have any English, but then when we came here the first winter,
Hmm.
we all went to high school where they had English
Mhm.
English classes.
Yeah. Okay. I understand something about the crate that was used for shipping the equipment over, the furniture over, was used for something else. What was it
I
used
don't
for?
remember that.
No?
I, I know some people have talked about different things. I know that when we came here, you had to have a sponsor.
Mhm.
And what had happened was, there was that were in contact with officers here,
Yeah.
and together they would regulate the immigration.
Mhm.
And so you had to apply for immigration first of all. You had to apply for a visa and all that kind of stuff. Then you had to go and have a physical, all of us. That was the first time I ever saw my dad in his underwear,
Okay.
because we had to all go through the physical. The boy went with the men and the boys together in one room,
Uh-huh.
and the women and the mother in the other room, the girls,
Yes.
and with other people,
Yes, yeah.
you know. And then you go through the line,
Mhm.
and then the doctor sees you, asks a few questions, taps here and there, and
Yeah.
feels things, and then you go.
Yeah.
And that was quite an experience, because you never see these things at all, you know.
It's funny though, you lived in such a small home, you think you would have seen him without his pants
Never,
on, but.
never. No, they were very prim and proper. And
That's fine.
but the crate, like what happened was we had a sponsor. The sponsor was in Portage La Prairie by Winnipeg,
Yes.
and he was a beet farmer, sugar beets,
Okay.
which was very seasonal employment. And what they needed was seasonal workers
Yes. Yes.
and migrant workers.
Mhm.
So they hired people like that. It was, well, we had no choice. We had to have a sponsor.
Mhm.
We could find no one else, and
Yep.
this is what was recommended. And
Mhm.
we've heard some stories of that type of people, though, like that.
Huh. Take it
When we
back.
came to Canada, our ticket on the train, after we got off the boat in Halifax, we got on the train,
Mhm.
and then we could stop and stay in Belleville, where my uncle lived, for a little while, which we did.
Yeah.
And as we were there, Dad said, well, I want to go see around here a little bit.
Mhm.
So we went to see, and that's where we met Mr. Van der Schaaf and others.
Oh,
And they said, don't go to Manitoba. You will never
okay.
come back, and it'll be awful hard once the season is over. What are you going to do with all these teenage kids?
Yes.
It would be very difficult.
Yep.
And so we looked for work here, and we found work at Edie Smith Canning Factory
Okay.
for all of us right away. Plus
Very good.
a house, like the company owned the houses,
Oh.
and we could rent the house along with the job.
Oh, wonderful.
And he said, only one problem is what the guy that hired us said. You can't all live in the same house, not so many kids.
No.
You can't have that.
Yeah.
So we get two adjoining, one double house,
Wow.
the semi. Mom says, is there a door in between? He said, no, you got to go around. Mom said, well, not work. We'll take the one half only. And so that's what we did.
That's
And so we had the one. But so then the crate had already been sent on to Winnipeg.
Oh,
So
my
we
furniture.
got somebody to phone down there and to talk to CN, and they were to send it back, which they did. They sent it back. So we were about 2 weeks without our furniture and
Stuff.
stuff.
Mhm.
And the guy there said, well, you bound to come because you made this contract.
Yes.
But if we, like the government said, whoever was in charge said, if you are self-sufficient
That's
and
fine.
you find a place to work, you can stay where you want.
Oh, good.
Because it caused a lot of problems in the long run.
Yeah.
So the crate did come back, and those 2 weeks we lived with just orange crates and fold-up chairs. There was a minister of a church that came by that knew that we had just arrived and we had nothing to sit on.
Uh-huh.
So he came with, in his trunk, a bunch of folding chairs.
Ah,
And he said, if you promise to go to my church, you can have them.
that's cute.
And Dad said, we will not go to your church.
Okay.
And so he said, well, we'll leave the chairs anyway.
Ah, so he was a
Yeah,
good
it was
natured man.
interesting.
You mentioned that I think you said Frank moved to New York because of the Spanish flu and the illnesses that they'd had. Why did Paca not choose to move to New York as well? Because he couldn't go there, or because he just wanted to settle
It
in
was
Ontario?
easier for us to go to Canada than to the States. The States had more restrictions.
Okay.
And we thought that perhaps Canada would be a bit more what they advertised, the land of opportunity.
Okay. Yes.
They also promoted a lot of immigration by showing films.
Okay.
And the films are very nicely done, not
Propaganda.
relevant to life.
No. Okay. Okay.
You know.
Two more questions about immigration. One was, what were the general feelings among the children? Were all of you going into this, open-eyed? You knew exactly what was happening, or was anyone a little bit disillusioned about what life would be like in Canada?
I don't think you would ever say that you go with open eyes, because nobody knows. Eh?
No.
Like you step, it's a step of faith, it's a step in the dark. But I think every one of us was anticipating
Excitement or
the
adventure?
excitement and the adventure of coming.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody was really disappointed.
Okay.
It brought us very close together,
Mhm.
because when we were here for the first while, or for not even now yet, Like the oldest 5, they were all the teenagers.
Yes.
They stuck together like glue. Wherever we went, we were always with the 5ers, always.
Yeah. Good.
You know,
All right.
and we still are.
Yeah.
So,
Also, can you talk about Pocket's trips to Holland after you'd immigrated to collect debts? You said that he hadn't gotten all the money for things.
I'm not sure whether he actually had much success. I was the first one to go back
Okay.
because when we got married, I went.
To get
And
away.
there was Dad said to me, because we had no money, and I had borrowed every last cent to go there, plus, pay, like in Holland, you pay for your own wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and you know, my future wife didn't have any more money saved up than what her trip here would cost. So we started totally with nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad said to me, you may go to Holland, you may collect some money if you can.
Yep.
And he gave me addresses of different people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to all these people and not collected 1 cent.
Okay.
They all figured, well, that's why they didn't pay to start with.
Yeah.
First of all, there probably different reasons. Some of them had hardships.
Mm-hmm.
But
They
if they
figure
had
once
really
you lose the
wanted to
country.
pay, they would have paid before Dad would have left Holland.
Mm-hmm.
They were figuring, well, long gone,
Yep.
let's keep it young.
Yeah.
Poor way of doing. But anyway, so we never got 1 cent from that.
Okay.
It cost us plenty of money for our trip, for the wedding,
Uh-huh.
for the, we had to make a little crate to come here
Yeah.
because there was some stuff that Mom took along.
Yeah.
And it was an expensive outing.
Yeah.
When we came back to Canada, married, we rented a little place at, what, $12.50 a week?
Wow.
It was like a motel. It was a small little apartment building in Guelph. No car, walked to work or got picked up or go by bus or whatever. And then we were there only for a short while, and then we moved into the country.
Mm-hmm.
But the first week when we were back home, we had no money,
Uh-huh.
and I borrowed $10 from my sister Lucy so we could buy groceries to live for the weekend.
Wow. But it was all worth it.
It was well worth it.
All right.
That's my little brother Leo. He was 4 when he died. He's the one that got killed by being run over by the track of the bulldozer. Dad on the bulldozer, looking the other way, didn't see it happen.
How old is he in this picture?
Just before he was 4.
Oh, okay.
Actually, that picture, I was on that picture with him, and they took
Ah.
this off the picture.
Ah.
You can see part of my sweater behind him there.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, yeah,
Okay.
he was a chubby little fella.
Mm-hmm.
He very curly hair,
Yeah.
pleasant little boy. He was a little cranky the day that this all happened.
Yeah.
But and that's one of the reasons that he went along with Dad.
Yeah.
But yeah, what do you remember of a little kid when there's so many little kids around, eh?
Yes. Yeah.
You know, at that time Josie was just a little tot, and she was just walking and very pretty,
Yes.
and yeah.
He was falling by the wayside a little bit.
But the Lord took him at an early age because, like it says in the Bible, the Lord loved him and took him.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Okay.
The house that we rented from E.D. Smith Canning Factory, and we had that half of the house. So it was a 2-story, and the bedrooms were all upstairs, and there was a large living room and a large kitchen. And this is the first car that Dad bought. It was a 53 Chrysler. It was one with a Hydra flow transmission, almost like an automatic. But one car was not enough, and so we bought another car. And there's Ted, myself, and Lucy, and that's Jane, I think, on the back there, and there's Fred.
Okay. Good.
This is a picture taken when we were first on the farm in 1957, the farm that my dad, that we all together then bought, and Dad ended up being with. Uncle Luke lived there later. And the girls on there are, this is Virginia Claver, my mom's sister's daughter. That's my sister Grace, that's my sister Jane, that's my sister Josie, and that's another one of the Clavers, that's Elizabeth.
Okay.
And this is the little chicken coop that we had, and this is the first tractor that Dad bought, Massey Ferguson.
Okay.
It was in 1958, and this, obviously I was cutting the grass there with the old Farm 8s, and this was on the farm, the 200-acre farm that we bought, that Uncle Luke later on lived on.
Okay. Good.
That was my Beppe Anna, my dad's mom. She has been here in Canada only once, and with her are my brother Dan, there, and my brother Henry here, my sister Hilda, and my sister Shirley, and my daughter Teresa. This photo was taken at the farm where Paca lived and where Uncle Luke bought later. You see the pillars at the front, the red brick house, and a little shed on the side there with the car in it.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, Beppe was here only once, and she came mainly not only to see my mom and dad, but also to see her sister. Her sister, Moikerike, went to live in Iowa when she was a young girl. What happened was a family from their village had immigrated, and one of the boys had written her a letter and says, I remember you from school, and I'm looking for a wife.
Oh my.
If you would be willing to come here, and if we can agree on it, then you can stay here. I pay everything for you, and if not, we'll send you back home.
Wow.
So Moikerike, like Beppa's older sister, had gone here in early part of the century, I'm not sure, in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
And she came here, stayed, they did get married, she raised a good family. Of all her children, several of them became pastors.
Okay.
And Beppe had never seen her again, so she wanted to see her. And so Antini and I were going to take her one day, but I couldn't get off at the very last moment because something happened at work and one guy got sick and I had to take his place. So then my mom and dad ended up taking Beppe Anna to Iowa.
Okay. So she could get married. All right.
This is a picture of when my mom and dad were married 25 years, at which they, also my sister Lucy, here, and my sister Anne here, got married. There was a double wedding.
Yeah.
And
Say it's on
Jane is a bridesmaid and Josie is a bridesmaid.
Okay.
And of course there's my brother Ted, and there's my wife Tini, and there's my brother Fred, and there's myself with my little daughter,
Yeah.
and there is Henry, and there's Luke, and there's, not sure, that's John, that's Luke, that's Sam, that's Dan, and here is Carl, I guess.
Who's a little baby in his arms? I don't know.
Surely, perhaps.
Okay. Neat.
Not sure.
Where was this held?
This was on the farm in Rockwood that my dad at one time had.
Oh, okay.
When they first came to Canada, we got the farm where Luke later on lived. But then, in addition, after some years, they bought another farm, but they bought it only to get the milk contract.
Interesting.
And Dad and Mom lived there for some time till they finally sold it again.
Okay, good.
There's my mom with all her daughters before, like Dad had already passed away. We knew that Jane was sick and she died of cancer shortly after that.
When would this picture have been taken?
I'm not sure exactly of the date, but not too long before Jane passed away. Shirley, there, the farmer, Hilda, Grace, Josie, then my mom, of course, then Jane, then Anne, and then Lucy.
Would you know the year at all about?
She might have died in 95.
Yeah, something like
Okay,
that.
so it's
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, all right.
That is one of the last pictures of my mom and dad together. They made a trip to California. They were away for 6 weeks all told. They went to many places all over the States. They saw the Mormon Tabernacle and the different things. And Dad drove himself. They had a car. They just slept in motels. And this is taken somewhere in California as far as I know.
How old would they have been at the time?
Well, Dad was in his 73rd year when he died. And this was maybe a year before, if not, no more than that.
Okay.
So, and
Okay.
Mom was always 4 years younger.
Yes, okay.
This is an article in a paper about my Aunt Alida, my dad's younger sister, who had been married, of course, a long time and had a family, but then her husband died, her kids had left the house, and she felt called to go to Albania as a bit of a missionary. She always had Bible studies with the people, and she played with the kids a lot. And I said, how do you get by with talking? She said, oh, I talk a little English, and they understand a little English. And she says, no, they know me, and I know them. And she became very good friends with a whole lot of them and helped a lot of them. And some of them came through her testimony to know the Lord.
Oh, very good. Okay, you talked about when you immigrated here that you were trying to find work as a family and you were able to work at the Edie Smith factory. What kind of work did you do there, and how many of the siblings were involved in that?
My dad was able to work there for the gardener.
Okay.
First he started for the carpenter, but that wasn't his style of work. And the carpenter soon realized, no, this is not the right man for me. Plus, the carpenter also realized there's a Dutch fellow that runs the greenhouses, and there's a lot of the plant engineering, and Dad might be better off working with him, so Dad worked for that guy.
Okay.
And the rest of us, Ted, myself, and my brother Fred, worked first for the outside landscaper, the gardener, because they own a lot of property and properties, and they did all the landscaping themselves, so we worked for that Scottish fella for a while. Ted didn't last long because the old man didn't like him and he didn't get along with him, so he found a job driving truck in Hamilton pretty well right away.
Okay.
But then Fred, myself, Lucy and Ann and Carl worked there in the plant.
Okay.
And
Is this the same Edie Smith that
Edie
does
Smith,
fruit
canning factory
canning factory? Okay.
in Fruitland in
Okay.
Winona.
Okay.
And what happened was after, when we were first hired, Fred and I were just laborers, and we just piled ketchup boxes and that kind of stuff on skids or off the skids in the warehouses and onto the trucks and things like that. But it didn't last too long because then we got onto the forklifts. First me and then Fred. And Lucy and Ann, they worked in the factory. First started with picking fruit off the belts, like a picking
Bad fruit.
bad fruit off and things like that. But it only lasted a couple days,
Okay.
and then they got to run the machines.
Oh wow. Okay.
And Carl too.
So they gradually wound their ways
Yeah,
up.
that didn't take long.
Okay. Good.
And they would be on the bottling machines or on the other type of machines.
Yeah.
You know.
How many years were you there for? Like you as a family?
Only 1 year. we were
Really?
there, yeah.
Huh, okay.
Because the following fall already, in the wintertime, Dad started to look around for a farm because it was always his intention to become
Sufficient.
self-employed
Okay.
and self-sufficient again.
Okay.
So we did that, and we bought that farm then in the winter of like early 1957, 56, 57. We had come in April of 56. We started work at the Edie Smith canning plant probably in the latter part of April.
Okay.
And we worked here, I worked through the winter there yet,
Mm-hmm.
but then the following spring we were all moved to Guelph.
To the farm. Okay. Just a couple more questions about the Edie Smith area years there. You said Uncle Ted got a truck driving job. Can you tell us, do you know a story about when he went by the plant and tooted the horn or something?
I don't know that.
You don't know that?
No.
Okay.
What do you know about it, Trevor?
Oh, that's all I had heard is he got a job before anybody else away from Edie Smith, so he wanted to brag about it.
Okay,
That might
alright.
as well happen, but he.
Okay.
The reason that he did get a job pretty well right away is when we came to the Winona area, we went to the church right away, like become involved with the church,
Yeah.
and so the youth group there, we went right away to the meetings.
Yes.
And we had been just on the Sunday night at the youth group meeting,
Yeah.
and there was an opportunity to get a job as what he got later.
Okay.
And what happened was the old landscaper didn't like him for some reason or other,
Yes.
and they couldn't understand each other. And so then Ted phoned this young fellow right away, and he got the job right away to
Oh, good.
work out.
Good. Can you talk about Pocky getting cinders instead of shingles?
Yeah.
And what was that?
Because of the English language, Dad didn't understand that, and that's when he was working for the first place where
Mm-hmm.
it was the carpenter, but also maintenance.
Yeah.
And they had already filled some holes with cinders.
Okay. What
And
are
the-
cinders?
Cinders are burnt coal,
Okay. Yes.
burnt coal cinders,
Yeah. Okay.
which they used often to fill potholes and things like that around the factory. And he had done that.
Okay.
But this time they were building a little shed, and he had to get shingles.
Okay.
But Dad didn't know the difference.
Ah.
And a lot of these things happened because when we were the very first week that we lived in Winona, and then we were as a family on our own, because the first week or maybe 2 weeks we had stayed with other people, like my mom's sister,
Uh-huh.
des rond de area, Moike Griet.
Okay.
But now we were on our own, and because the language, of course, we had learned a little bit of English in school in Holland, Lucy and I, but that's totally different than here in Canada, and then the accent is different, and the words are somewhat used different.
Yeah.
And Mom said, we're going to make soup. So Lucy, you go and get some bones from the butcher or from the store, soup bones,
Yes.
to to boil in the soup, but she came home with beans,
Beans.
soup beans.
Okay.
Because the clerk didn't understand what soup bones.
Okay.
Soup
Okay.
bones. What? Soup bones.
What did Pocket end up doing with these? Like he got shingles or cinders
Oh,
instead of
well,
shingles.
there
What did
was
he do with them then?
A small misunderstanding, and
Okay.
I'm not sure what happened. Whether he just,
Off the roads
people would laugh at him.
Okay.
You know? It was difficult for people at that age. Dad was 45 when we immigrated.
Yeah, it's
Mom
harder
was
to
41.
transition. Mhm.
That is quite
Transition.
an age to make that big a change.
Yes.
You burn all the bridges behind you.
Yeah.
And all your friends are gone. All your relatives are gone pretty well,
Yeah.
Although Moike Anna from the States and her husband Frank, they came as soon as they had immigrated. It only a matter of weeks. And we saw them, and then shortly after that they came here,
Oh, good. Okay. And
Just
did they
to-
live nearby?
They lived in New Jersey.
Oh, okay. That's not that
So it
nearby.
was in those days a 14-hour trip.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you want to see each other, you do that.
You make
right?
the trip. That's right. Firm and Heiress. How did everything start with that? You said it was a year after you'd come to
The
Canada.
following year, yeah. And Dad bought this farm from a Dutchman, Mr. Bosman, and with it came 15,000 chickens.
Wow.
I'm not sure whether they were laying. They weren't laying hens, I don't think. But anyway, they came 1,500
Okay.
chickens,
Yep.
laying hens. But they didn't lay very long, and they got rid of them fairly soon because Dad was not a chicken farmer. And there was a bunch of beef cows, and there was about 7 milking cows. And after a bit, they sold the beef cows, they sold the chickens, and they majored on the dairy,
Okay.
and that's how it became a dairy farm eventually.
Did he get the farm for a deal, or was it still a big
It was-
stretch financially? Or?
It was 200 acres, and we paid the going price in
Okay.
those days, which was at that time, I think, $27,000.
Wow.
But a dollar was worth much more than a dollar is now.
Yes. Yep.
And another story about that is, we had all banded together and made a commitment to help one another, so we brought all the money home.
Yes.
This fellow had apparently done this a couple times. He was a Dutchman, and he had had the farm for some time. What he did was he didn't live on the farm.
Mhm.
He would try to sell the farm, and then when somebody got on the farm, he often made it so that the people usually didn't make it, and he'd get it back and get it down payment. Happened at least a couple times before. And so we had bought it in the spring, in the early spring, and put a down payment on. And one of the stipulations was that we had to pay again another payment in June. And it was a large amount. It was, I think, $8,000.
Okay.
And so we had gotten the money together, but we all had to scrape, and we all had to really
Uh-huh.
work hard
Uh-huh.
and put it all together. And we didn't waste no money in those days, like nothing on self-interest,
Yes.
So I brought the money there on a Saturday afternoon, and the man was just shocked that we did get it together. He
Yay.
had always thought we'd never make it. He openly admitted it.
Yeah.
And,
I'm a swindler.
wow, it was terrible.
Wow. Can you describe a lot? You're talking about how much you scraped and scrimped. Can you describe some of the poverty of those early years in tangible terms? Like, what did you eat for dinner, or did you all share underwear, that kind of stuff?
We did not share underwear.
Okay.
My mom was a very good housewife where she could make things stretch.
Okay. Yep.
And I'm sure that there was times that she would scratch her head and wonder what to do. But we had always simple suppers. We always had enough to eat, though.
Yeah.
I know that that the same as it was in Holland when the butcher or the grocer would come around with this cart. Often Mom would get deals because they would also always wait till the end of the day
Yes. Yeah.
or the end of the week.
Yeah.
And because it was a large family, they probably did a little bit less. But Mom, when the baker here in those days also came with a truck to all the farm families.
Yeah.
Well, drop off things at different places.
Yeah.
And this man, I still remember him. He came with his panel truck and bread, and he said, "I'll sell you all the bread you want." And Mom said, "I will only buy it if you make me a deal."
Yes.
And she bought the bread always cheap, but she always got maybe a day old bread.
Yep.
But it worked for us,
Yep. Yep.
But no, we've never gone without.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that often enough, like, we finished everything up
Yes.
many times.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was ever poverty. We never looked at ourselves ever
No.
of being shortchanged.
Yeah.
You know?
I somehow have my father-in-law's story in my head about a huge pail of apple butter or something, or
Yeah.
No, I
don't
think
know.
he said your mom used to buy this huge pail of apple
Well,
butter, and by the time it got to the bottom, it was just all old tasting and stuff. But
Yeah.
it went far.
But I'm sure they did that too. They bought in bulk
Yeah,
as much as they could.
you'd
know.
have to.
And but no, we never were shortchanged or felt. We never felt poor. Never.
Okay, good. What was it like to be part of a family of 17?
No,
Normal.
because I was the second one.
Okay.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. I remember that until I got married in Holland, at least, I always had to peel the potatoes after school.
Okay.
A pail
That's a
full,
lot of potatoes.
a pail full every day.
Yeah.
And when we got married, and I was in Holland then for that occasion,
Uh-huh.
then my wife's mother, so mother-in-law to be,
Uh-huh.
she said, "Would you peel the potatoes?" I said, "No, sir, not peel potatoes. I've peeled enough potatoes in my life." Although I have peeled potatoes
I'm
since.
sure you have.
But yeah, those were things, a large family, especially during the war. I'm sure there must have been times that it was hard for them to find enough food
Mm-hmm.
and good things to eat. But
Yeah.
you see, we're now such a demanding society,
Uh-huh.
and snacking is always. We snack too, an
Yeah.
apple.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they almost always grew their own fruit, or
Yeah.
they were able to get fruit in bulk.
Yeah.
And at night, the common thing was that after supper at night, then Mum would, after a little while before most of us would go to bed, she'd get a whole bucket full or pail full of apples,
Yeah.
and she'd start peeling and cutting,
Yeah,
and everybody
yeah,
started
yeah.
eating pieces of apple.
Ah.
And for the meals in the daytime, it was we would have in the morning in Holland when we were growing up, and here in Canada too. Here in Canada we got into cornflakes, but in Holland we never had that.
Okay.
We always had maybe a slice of bread with jam.
Mm-hmm.
When it was really poor, we'd have a slice of bread by itself.
Yeah.
Sometimes nothing on it.
Yeah.
And on Sundays or on Saturday nights, then we'd have also bread, but then we get maybe some meat on it.
Ah, okay.
And once a week, maybe an egg,
Mm-hmm.
maybe half an egg.
Yeah.
There was, but later on that was all more normal.
Mm-hmm.
But for the main meals, Mum would always potatoes pretty well.
Yes.
Sundays always soup.
Yeah.
Saturdays almost always pea soup.
Yep.
And the main meals would consist of potatoes and one veggie, and not always meat, but sometimes a little bit meat, or onions.
Okay.
And then for dessert, always porridge.
Okay. Huh.
And that was a
Stick to your
very
ribs
simple
and-
meal,
Yeah.
but it was very nutritious.
Good. Good.
And if you had a warm meal at noontime, then you get leftovers at supper time.
Okay. Yeah. Still, though, with 17, there must have been some things that were a blessing about it, and some things that were a drawback about it. Like, do you look at the size of the family in any way and think, oh, that was something that we missed out on?
Never.
No.
Not
Okay.
once, ever.
Very good.
Not once. I have never ever thought, even remotely, that we missed out. We
Okay.
missed out on nothing.
When you were back in Holland, did many of the people around you have families as large, or were you just a conundrum?
It wasn't. It was not uncommon for people to have 12 or 13 children,
Okay.
but it was. It wasn't frowned upon at all.
Okay.
Although some people probably might have made jokes, but we would have never known.
Okay. Why do you think people had such large families? Was it just no thoughts of birth control, or was it just you had a farm so you needed workers, or?
The mentality of people was different then than it is now. They did not at all look at. They were not as selfish, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
I think. If you are realistic about it all, we've like later on in life when we were here in Canada, sometimes we would sit around talking with my dad to talk about things. Say,
Yeah.
well, was that wise to have so many children?
Yes.
He said, well, they haven't missed out,
Uh-huh.
and we've not missed out having them.
Mm-hmm.
And what would the Lord want us to do? Like he says, we
Yeah.
live normal as husband and wife. There was a time that people, especially people, the Christians or religious people,
Mm-hmm.
would frown upon taking the matter of nature in your own hands. And justifiable or not, but it was no drawback to have a large family.
No.
But in some cases it was, if the people were ill, if there was a lot of sicknesses and things like that, which we didn't have.
Okay.
We had good families, not a lot of problems.
Did
It
you
was a
feel that all
blessing.
of you got some kind of individual time? Like, with that many kids, it's hard. Did you feel close to your parents as an
I
individual?
felt very close to my dad and mom.
Yeah,
More,
okay.
more close to dad than mom. But there might be some siblings that might have said, well, we never really got to know dad and mom as. But I
Maybe
think it's
some of the
more
later
their own
kids.
fault
Okay.
than dad and mom's fault.
Okay.
I'm sure that mom and dad were busy enough to but you know how it goes. Like if a person wants or needs attention, they get the attention.
Yeah. Okay.
But if like, it's the same in every walk of life. There are people that are never satisfied no matter what, and there's people that are always content no matter what.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay.
But in a large family, you learn to share.
Yes.
You learn to get
yeah.
along.
Yeah.
Another thing was though, like when we now talk, like even different people, all of us grew up being fairly fussy about food, critical about things, right?
Okay.
And yet, you know, we didn't have a lot, but we, like,
You developed the
Mom
taste
went-
soon enough.
Yeah, but Mom was, she was able to often have somewhat variety that if a person really didn't really like something, well, he could at least have a piece of bread or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
You know,
Good.
they were strict in some ways, but not overly strict in other ways either.
Okay.
Sometimes you say, how could you get away with it with a family like that? I know one thing, there were some people that didn't like certain things, like my brother Fred didn't like anything that had onions or spices in it.
Okay.
And then we'd sit around and say, you don't like it, right? Because then we'd eat it right away.
Oh.
Because it was enough, like it
Yes,
was
there were
nice
enough
to have
people
a little
wanting it.
extra, you know?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
How did you all fit around a table? Like, did you just have one table, or were
We
there?
just had one table.
Okay.
And the table was large enough that,
Mhm.
you know, 14, 15, 16 people could sit around it.
Yeah.
It was an ordinary table, but with shelves, you know, and
Yeah.
it
And did
was
the family
it was
work?
wall to wall though. The
Okay.
kitchen, the whole kitchen was taken up.
Okay.
Like there was a wooden bench against the window on which 3 kids could sit on one end of the table,
Uh-huh.
and then Dad would sit. Always Dad sat in the same spot,
Yes.
and across from Dad, Mum would sit, but maybe one more sibling on her one side.
Yeah.
And then a little over, that's where the girl that worked for Mum always sat, and then you know the girls on the Lucy and Ann on the one end, and then us on the other side.
Would you
Was
say your
pretty-
family was very organized and structured? Like, did it work like clockwork with that many kids, or did you know, when you were on the boat, you said each elder sibling took care of one younger sibling? Is that how your family generally operated?
No,
Or?
it didn't as a family work that way, but we all did take care of each other, and we all helped
Okay.
each other. Like if there was a younger person sitting beside you and he needed help with something, you would help him right away.
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
if somebody needed to go to the bathroom, you know, during supper, which sometimes had,
Okay.
then whoever was closest would give him a hand.
Yeah. So your mom was not taking care of 17 children all by
No,
herself.
No, because no, she didn't. We
No.
all helped pitched in,
Mhm.
and automatically, like without without being prodded to, like it just worked that way, you know.
Yeah. Good.
But yeah, no. It was good.
Which child would be the proverbial angel, and which would have been the more challenging one of the family in general? Like, what would your parents have said? Who is the easiest child? Who is the most challenging child?
I wouldn't know.
No.
I think perhaps I was not the easiest
Okay.
because I had to go to high school, and Ted went to the agricultural school, and Fred too,
Yeah.
which were one older, one younger than me.
Yeah.
The reason was that they didn't want everybody to have the same,
Yes.
and perhaps they thought that I was perhaps a bit more easier to go in different direction.
Okay.
See, everybody can't always have the same occupation, and people are all different anyway.
Yes.
But what bothered me in those days was that I had to go 5.5 days a week.
Oh, and
Saturday
they were
mornings
2 or
too.
3 or something.
And they
Okay.
were 2 or 3 days a week.
Okay.
And so they had lots of time to work at the farm,
Mhm.
which was a lot of driving tractors and machinery.
Fun stuff.
Well, that seemed to be that way to me
Yes. Yeah.
at the time.
Okay.
So I don't know whether I was challenging. I know that I was probably a bit more short-tempered than maybe Ted was,
Okay.
but Fred was stubborn in his own way.
Okay.
And then my sister Ann, she had a real short temper in those days.
Okay.
Lucy had a will of her own.
What was John de Vries like? I'm just kind of curious.
Well, he was a bit one of the younger ones, eh?
Mhm.
But I think he was very good. I
Yeah.
remember him with his sore foot in the hospital a lot. And we went to see him, we'd already married. But no, the kids were always nice.
Yeah.
You see, in a large family, there's no room for a lot of silliness.
Yes.
Because if one of the kids is a real pest,
Yeah.
well, he gets smartened up by all the others.
The other
quick enough,
kids.
you know? I mean, there's no room for that.
Yes. Yeah.
What our parents taught us was to become independent,
Mm-hmm.
to grow up and stand on your own legs,
Mhm.
like do what you need to do right.
Yeah.
Like we were always, of course, there was always Bible reading.
Mhm.
There was in the morning with breakfast. Almost always, Mom and Dad were both there.
Mm-hmm.
Seldom that,
Wow.
but later on when Dad was real busy, he might not always be there, but almost always in the morning.
Yeah.
And so there would be the regular breakfast time,
Yeah.
prayer before and after,
Yeah.
and reading of the scheurkalender, like the where you rip off a page every day, you know,
Yep.
with a little Bible verse.
Yep.
Then at lunchtime, if we come home for lunch, we're reading from the Bible
Mhm.
after dinner for sure.
Mhm.
And at night again. Then after night, we always the Kinder Bible, the children's Bible, the story Bible.
Yep.
And then we always would sit down and discuss things after
Mm.
supper, you know, about what we had been reading about, or whatever subject, often to do with religion and Christianity.
How did people get heard? Like, 17 people trying to interject all at
Yeah,
once.
but you know, we always had good conversations,
Yeah,
and you
okay.
learn to also listen to 2 or 3 conversations at the same time.
Okay.
I'm kidding, but it does work that way a little bit, though.
Yeah.
If there was some interesting subject, everybody would quieten down.
Yes, okay.
Plus, you know, often enough, some of the smaller kids would go and play outside already,
Mhm.
and
Yeah, or they might be in
it
bed. or-
wasn't a noisy bunch all the time. But what we would have often is, especially on the Sunday afternoons, Dad would play the little organ with with his cut off fingers, you know,
Yes.
and we'd sing some songs from the
Ah.
gospel songs, you know, and
Yeah.
other people that were walking by on the street would come in the house and sing along with us,
Ah.
especially teenagers. You know?
Yeah. Neat.
There was those days, things were in a way much different.
Yeah, more
Just like what we
community
said
oriented.
about the war already, there was a closeness, a cohesiveness, you know,
Yeah.
and that was very nice.
Oh, good. How would you describe your parents' relationship while you were in Canada? Were they affectionate? Did they hug a lot? Did they seem in love, or was it more just a commitment thing, or were they serious towards each other, or what was it?
I think all of it.
Okay.
I think they were in love.
Mhm.
I think they really loved each other.
Yeah.
My dad and mom were more expressive than some people in their age.
Towards
I-
each other and towards you, or just
No, not to us so much.
okay?
But I've seen my mom and dad many times hold each other, kiss
Mhm.
each other.
Okay.
And of course, I remember growing up sitting on my dad's knee a
Okay.
lot,
Oh, good.
and so did everybody else.
Good.
Like
okay.
at a certain age, they would sit on Dad's knee while reading the Bible, or while, you know, or even after supper.
Yeah.
Or Mom was very good, but she was not a hugger. She was
Okay.
not like she was very good, and I'm sure she loved everybody dearly, but she was
Mhm.
not a enveloping person like some people,
Okay.
you know.
Do you ever remember either of your parents telling you that they loved you, or that they were proud of you?
That wasn't said in those words.
No. Okay.
They
but did
might
you
have
feel
said
it? Or?
that they wouldn't say it out loud,
No. Okay.
but you just knew that it was true.
okay.
But they had their times, I'm sure. Mom was very busy and she had a lot of headaches. And I remember that she would sometimes be overwhelmed with all the work. Because Mom was a very precise person. She wanted
Okay.
things very neat and
Okay.
clean and nice, you know.
Yeah.
She wasn't careless. She didn't have tools to work with.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there was at times, I've seen her cry
yeah.
from frustration,
Okay.
you know, but it was nothing serious.
No. Okay.
They never even dreamt of ever leaving each other or
No,
anything like
okay.
that. That was never even ever in their mind.
Yeah. Good. So you felt secure growing up in the home
Very
and stuff.
secure.
On the farm there, were you all also very involved in the farm and running it and stuff? The girls as well as the boys, or at that point were a lot of the boys on their own adventures or their own ventures of work?
Well,
or-
I was the first one to get married,
Okay.
and we got married in January of 1959.
Uh-huh.
Until that time, my brother Fred and I worked at the gravel pit, but we worked night shifts in the summer, spring, summer, and fall,
Uh-huh.
and then we would still work on the farm. We would always go to bed as soon as we come home from work. We'd done at 12 o'clock.
Yep.
Get up and do the farm work with Dad or whoever was there, the haying and the planting and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then after at 5 o'clock we'd quickly eat and then go back to work. But we would not like it one bit if Mom wasn't home when we came out of bed,
Yes.
or if Mom wasn't there when we had to eat supper before we left to work.
Ah, poor
That was-
lady. She needs a
No,
rest
she
too.
needed us. She needed us. She needed to
Okay.
be there. She wanted to be there too.
Yeah, I bet.
But it happened the odd time that she might have, that she had to go grocery shopping or whatever.
Oh, okay. Yep. You talked about how when you bought the farm, there were, I think you said some beef cattle and some chickens and stuff, and those didn't work, so you focused on dairy. After you'd established the dairy industry, was there any other kind of industry that you'd pursued afterwards, or?
Well, they already fairly quickly went into custom work,
Okay.
doing work with machinery for other farmers.
Like making machinery or
No, no.
fixing it, or?
No, working with machinery
Working. Oh, okay. Okay.
for other farmers so that they could earn more money.
And was this their own equipment that,
Their
that
own
they were using?
equipment, yeah.
Okay.
Because as soon Dad had done that in Holland too,
Yes.
and so to defray the cost of the equipment, like make it work for others so that you get paid for it, you know.
Uh-huh.
And then of course they developed slowly the dairy herd,
Mhm.
but that took quite a bit because you had to buy the quota
Okay.
per pound, like still do now,
Mhm.
and that was very expensive. So that's how come they bought the other farm, because with the farm came an amount of quota,
Okay.
and that's how they could grow.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
they grew, you know, fairly well.
Yeah. Good.
But then of course we left fairly quick. Like there was at first Dad and then Ted, myself and Fred. We were in a partnership agreement,
Mhm.
which we quit. I and my wife quit fairly soon after we got married because we didn't fit anymore because we needed our income for our own family,
Yes.
and it was done on a share basis. So the ones that weren't married, they could put all their earnings into it,
Yes.
and it become it's not balanced.
Inequalized. Yeah. Unequal.
And so we said no, it's not going to work. Especially, I wanted to raise a family of our own.
Yeah. Okay.
That was our identity,
Yeah.
like
yeah.
that family. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. A little bit of being independent and,
Yeah,
and leading your own life.
That's right.
Do you remember Baca bringing over the Holsteins from Holland? Or
I never did.
was
We
that
never
after
did.
Your time, after you left the farm?
I'm not sure that we ever did get
Oh,
Holsteins
okay,
out
I'd
from
heard that,
Holland.
okay.
I don't think we did. I know that a lot of originally came from Holland,
Yeah.
but whether they ever got, I don't think so. I'm not sure.
Okay.
They might have used Dutch blood from the breeding station, you know.
I also have a question here about liquid manure pits and just the
Yeah.
progressiveness of your farming.
That was quite interesting. Dad was always trying to somehow or other increase the income, of course, you know,
Mhm.
understandable.
Yeah.
And so, as the day went, then an easier way of disposing of the manure is to have liquid manure, a big tank. They built a big tank underneath the cow barn, and then all the droppings went in the tank with lots of water.
Yeah.
And then they would pump it out, and it's a lot easier pumping than shoveling. And so
Mhm.
that was the idea of liquid manure. And then, of course, they thought, well, we'll dry that stuff somewhat and then sell it
Mhm.
on the market. But that stank too much. It did not materialize.
Okay.
You remember those days a
Oh,
little
yeah. I
bit?
got some of the letterhead from it.
What's the letterhead say?
Liquid cow manure, pour it on in a nature zone.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're moving to the Guelph Reformed Church when you were here. Can you talk a little bit about Paca's and your family's involvement in the church, what kind of role he might have played if he was an elder, if he ever preached, that kind of stuff?
I don't think Dad ever preached.
Okay.
He preached only to us.
Okay.
But he did become an elder.
Mhm.
When we came to Guelph, we joined again the Reformed Church, which was what we were a member of in Holland and in Winona area.
Mhm.
And then when in 1970 the Lord started moving in this area,
Mhm.
and a lot of people got saved from that particular church. We were members of that church also. We got saved in June of 1970,
Uh-huh.
and consequently it became quite a bit of talk in the church.
Uh-huh.
And of that whole church, almost all the Sunday school teachers and almost all the people in a leading position left and got saved. But they got saved and then left, of course, because the reason being
Yeah.
that there was no real room for them, because
Okay.
what had changed for us was the doctrines of the church.
Mm.
As far as baptism, like we believed in
Mhm.
believers' baptism,
Mhm.
and before that it was sprinkling. And especially the Lord gave me a real revelation of how things were and how they should be.
Mhm.
And that was about the to be born again, to be
Mm.
born of the Spirit, which was not stressed in the Reformed Church. While we were in the Reformed Church, we were happy there until something started to move in our heart.
Mm.
And my dad was very much involved also in the church. He was a deacon first for a little while.
Mhm.
He always had been a deacon in the church in Holland too.
Mhm.
And then he became an elder here in the Reformed Church. He certainly meant well. But when the Lord started moving, and then when my wife and I first, and then other people got saved, and a whole slew of people got saved, and then baptized, it rocked the boat, to say the least.
Okay.
And the Reformed denomination, because of my learning and all that, and also always being interested in the things of God and the
Mhm.
things of the Bible,
Mhm.
I started to see then clearly that it was as if it was a continuation of the Old Testament.
Mhm.
And a lot of the Reformed, Christian people look at themselves just as if they are Jews. And that's not wrong in itself, because they might be, but or they might be the new spiritual Israel, except that they still focus on the law, keeping the law. You can't keep the law. We must be born again. Jesus kept the law for us. And when these things became a reality in our life, I started to see that in our Reformed tradition at that time, which has changed now,
Sure, yeah.
but that they were kept by the law. And as long as we are kept by the law, we keep the blinders on. We're blind, the Bible says. And especially when you then have the so-called covenant that God made with Abraham, which we now realize is fulfilled in Jesus, the promise was made to Abraham and his seed. One, that is not as many, but as one. In John, and the promise was when Jesus died on the cross, that was the fulfillment of the whole gospel. The thing was, if you as a believer believe that you've got to keep the law, that you're justified by the law, I know they know better, but yet that's how they live. And then you have the infant baptism, you have the covenant with Abraham. So the infant baptism then is supposed to be in place of the 8th-day circumcision of the Jewish children. And you see, that is a false doctrine. Now, it's not that they do this on purpose. They're blind. They don't see it. And when we got saved, it didn't take long. Then, of course, the very next day I went to talk to my dad.
I was just going to say, did Paka and Bep also align with this? Or?
And my dad, right away, he was listening, but he was upset and frustrated. Because he says, if what you say is true, that means all of us need to be born again. I said, every person does need to be born again, though. But it was very good and usually very smooth. Although Dad, at one time, like he got frustrated and he upset with me and things like that. And I went to apologize to him after that. I said I should have not allowed it to go that far, but because you hold on to your end, like we're all word debaters, right? And consequently, though, eventually most of my brothers and sisters got saved, and then Mom also.
Okay.
Mom got saved one time when she was in the hospital, and John van Driel was there and talked with her about being born again. And
how old would she have been?
Well, she was probably, it was in the 70s,
Okay.
Like it was in the 70s, so she might have been 60 or almost 60.
Yeah, okay.
And Dad then, he got baptized once at the Jesus Fest close to Carlisle there.
Okay.
And so that was a step in his direction.
Yes.
But see, it's a little difficult thing because Dad had certainly made a commitment when he was young. He had loved the Lord to his knowledge all his life.
Yeah.
When he then had this opportunity, and he saw then that believer's baptism was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Because infant baptism is it's not always wrong, but it's wrong in the way that they think it's the right of the Jewish circumcision, just in a modern form. It's not, you see, not at all. Anyway, when Dad saw that clearly, then he also, when the opportunity arose, got baptized.
Okay.
And after that happened, then life went on for a long time. Then Dad more or less retired, and finally he had his first heart attack.
Okay.
And after his first heart attack, he couldn't do a lot anymore. Like he was really weak. But then the one day, when he had his first heart attack, I quickly went to the hospital where he was, and he just came to while I was there. And he was, they drugged him up pretty good, but he came to then. And he says, he said, Jerry, you're there. He said, and then he said in Dutch, he said, Psalm 32, blessed is the man whose sins are forgiven, whose sins are fully covered. And he said, now I understand what you mean. And I really believe that's when it became a real reality to him.
Okay.
For his standing with the Lord,
Okay.
And after that, he had no problem whatsoever raising his hand, worshiping the Lord.
Okay. Being free.
It was a different life.
Yeah. Okay.
When we first got saved, and we would mention it to Dad, then he'd say, "Don't say you got saved. You got filled with the Spirit." I said, "Yeah, probably both." We didn't know the difference, and I'm not sure that we need to always say the differences so clearly. But I'm glad that the Lord keeps working. And if a person loves the Lord to start with, but doesn't know the Lord, if their desire is genuine, the Lord will honor that and make a way for them, you know. That's what I really feel happened to Mom and Dad.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I understand from when you were in Holland that it was a bit more of an evangelical type church. So how come when you... Okay, go ahead.
Because they had split away from the state church, the Reformed church,
Okay.
and they had made a group because they didn't want to continue with this liberalism that the main church was preaching.
Mm-hmm.
Now the other part that split away became the Christian Reformed church.
Okay.
And my dad and his parents and people in that area, they became Orthodox Reformed,
Okay.
which means the other ones were liberal
Yes.
Reformed.
Okay. Some more. Okay, moving on to Rockwood years. Can you describe or tell me what were the years that you were actually involved in the Rockwood farm? And can you just sort of give us a general idea of that whole venture?
The reason being was that they needed more quota,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why they bought this 126-acre farm.
And what year was that, or what years?
Oh,
that
it
about?
must have been, must have been 60, 61,
Okay.
those years.
Yeah.
We already were married. We
Okay.
lived not all that far from there, and my wife often went with the little kids to see Beppe and have coffee in the morning with them,
Okay.
although she didn't have a license yet at that time, but she'd go through the country on
Okay.
the country road.
Yeah.
But the reason was to buy the farm was very clearly
Yeah.
they needed more
More
quota, and with the farm came the cattle and the quota. Of course, then they farmed the land for some time.
Mhm.
But they realized that it was too much traveling back and forth with the machinery and all the time. So after some years, they said, no, it's not going to work. And they bought farms close to where they lived
Okay.
rather than keep this farm.
Can you actually describe your farm? I guess you had some kind of farming
We had a
adventure.
little farm for about 6 years.
Okay.
Because we were of the mistaken idea that if you were a Dutchman, you must become a farmer.
Yes.
But if you're not a good farmer, you're not a good Dutchman.
Okay.
Whatever.
Yeah.
And when we got married, that was one of the pressure things in life.
Mm-hmm.
It probably was a mistake. The thing was, though, I worked at the gravel pit as a machine crane operator,
Mm-hmm.
and it was good work, it was good pay, and we lived in town in Guelph, but we had this idea, we wanted to go farming.
Yeah.
And so we bought this farm,
Mhm.
and it was not a good farm, it was not very well developed, there was not a good barn on it.
What was it? Crops or was it animals?
Well, it was to start with, we bought it without any animals, but the man had always had some beef cattle and some pigs.
Yep.
It was only 8 acres, that was the drawback, because
Hmm.
we didn't realize it before we bought it, but if you didn't have a 100-acre farm in those days, you couldn't qualify for a government loan.
Ah.
And we never knew that until later, and we
Ah.
couldn't buy more land. And money was very hard to get in those days,
Uh-huh.
so we milked cows, 29 of them, and did all the work by hand, like not the milking, but all the gutter cleaning and all the feeding and all that stuff by hand. It was hard work, and we never made any money. We could barely keep our head above water. I
You
worked
say
out.
we, was this just your wife and you,
My
or was
wife
this
and
you and
I,
your
yeah.
kids? And
My wife and I, the kids were small,
kids just know, wow.
yeah, very small. And so those were tough years, but those years brought us on our knees.
Mm.
Those years we prayed. We
Mhm.
learned to pray at last.
Mm.
And that was one of the steps in coming to know the Lord.
Okay.
I really believe, because you become very serious about
Mm-hmm.
life, you know.
Yeah.
And then I work already part-time for John de Boer, where I now still work, although he's passed away. But he said one time, he says, you don't need to be a farmer, you know, to
Yes.
be successful.
Ah.
And so we always had a good time with him.
Mhm. Good. Do you think growing up in a large family yourself influenced your interest in having a large family as well? Like, you know, you grew up
I
at
don't
17.
know.
Did you always want to have a large family yourself?
Well, we never even gave that a lot of thought. When
Okay.
before we got married, we talked about it, and then Tini said, oh, I hope maybe we get 12 children.
Really?
No, I said 8.
Not 12. But anyway, yeah, no, we never gave it a lot of thought.
No.
We were happy with each one.
Yes. Yep.
And, you know, we one time rocked the boat at the church a little bit. At the Reformed church, when we were then already married, we had a young couples group.
Uh-huh.
There was about 20 or 21 couples.
Yeah.
And we talked about a lot of different topics and things. And also one time the topic was on birth control.
Yes. Yeah.
But that was something new in those days, and it was controversial. And
Well, it still is controversial.
well, we said, we'll just trust the Lord, and that's the way it went.
Yeah.
And we're happy with each one.
Yeah. Good. Going back to Paka a bit, how did you see Paka's faith deepen in the later years? You kind of talked about how he changed and how he grew in some ways. Did you see more of it? Was he more vocal about it in respect to his family life, or did your prayer life with him as a family change at all, or anything? Or
It's hard to say, because Dad always prayed out loud at the table,
okay,
and he always prayed specific.
so he was quite a spiritual leader in your home.
He was,
Yeah. Okay.
and he took his place from birth,
Yeah.
like from when my birth, right, from youth.
Yeah.
But it did change, of course, because when he later in life, like when he really started to walk with the Lord more, he was member of the Christian Businessmen Fellowship,
Okay. Yeah.
and other things. Like he also, when he would pay a bill wherever, he almost always put a tract in with it.
Interesting.
And like it was his way of witnessing,
Yeah. So in his community and stuff.
Yeah, he developed definitely
Yeah.
through the years more and more.
Neat.
It's sometimes hard to know, because sometimes as close people you don't talk as much as with siblings or with people your age or people outside your family,
Yeah. Yeah.
But he was a very serious man about the things of the Lord. He loved the Lord for sure.
Yeah.
And he loved righteousness. But I think he could also sometimes have a joke, laugh a little bit. And
Yeah.
he was a fun man. He was serious in a way, but he was, also fun.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Do you know what maybe his favorite hymn was, or you quoted that verse about how blessed is the man whose sin is forgiven?
Yeah.
But did he have a favorite hymn or
I
anything?
think it probably was, well, I just had it.
Great is thy
Yeah, great is thy
faithfulness.
Great, that
faithfulness.
faithfulness. Okay, great, thank you. What about Papa? Did she have a favorite verse or passage, and a favorite song?
I don't know.
No.
Do you remember? I know she loved the hymns.
Yeah. Okay.
She really loved the hymns.
And you
And,
seem to say that you had a lot of singing growing up in your youth. So.
We did, but Mom was not a singer.
Okay.
Mom did not sing a lot with the children.
Oh, okay.
She would read stories about Jesus, but she
Okay.
didn't sing a lot.
Okay.
Whereas Dad was often, he would play the organ a bit, and we'd sing from Johannes de Heer,
Okay.
the gospel songs.
Okay. Yep.
Dad was more a singer than Mom was.
I think Mom's favorite, one of her favorites was What a Friend I Have with
Yeah.
Jesus.
Okay. Good. Family reunions. I was actually a part of one of those, but when did they start, and where was it?
It started on the farm in Rockwood, probably with the wedding of Lucy and Anne.
Okay.
That is when the whole family was together. And I think from then on they started to more and more
Okay.
come together regularly as a family like
Okay.
that.
When did they start to go at Ponsonby School, or were there?
Well, I'm not sure how long that ago is, but that's quite a long time ago. You were probably very small yet.
All my life.
Yeah, I think so.
Do you have any special stories or fun stories about the reunions, or?
Except that some people threw water at each other. I got upset.
Did you throw water? in
No, I was there though, but
Yeah.
one of my cousins did. I
Yeah.
won't tell who.
A pail full of cold water over sometimes some of the older people. Then
Oh.
when it was my turn, and totally unexpected, somebody threw water, a pail full, over
Yeah.
from behind over top of me.
Oh.
Takes your breath away. It wasn't funny though, because I got angry because I said it's very disrespectful
Yes.
to older people to do that.
That's
Anyway,
right.
I blew it.
You're right though.
That's okay. When did Paka die?
83.
83. Okay, and how old was he at the time?
He was in his 73rd.
Year. Okay, and I think you said it was because of heart
It
problems.
was in July, yeah. We actually were away camping in Elam, Elam Bible Institute at the camping week.
Oh, really? Okay.
And they came from the office in the evening and told us that Dad had passed away that afternoon.
Okay, all right.
He was, he had been hoeing the potatoes that afternoon, and then they sat down at night, and then it was almost time to go to bed. I think it was 11 o'clock.
Oh.
And Mum said, well, should we go to bed or do you want to see the news? He said, well, we'll watch the news. So Mum, they didn't have a remote, of course, in those days. She went to turn the TV on, and when she came back, she said, okay, gone. He had died, still sitting in a chair, sitting straight up, didn't fall over. And so she called my brother Ted, and then called the doctor, and then, yeah, he'd gone.
Yeah, okay.
It
How
was
did
a
his
quick,
death,
easy way going.
how does his death affect the family? Family dynamics, family
Well,
in general?
of course, it's always a sad thing, it's a shock,
Mhm.
but we had some neighbor kids that were with us all the time as we lived in that area,
Mhm.
that came then also to the funeral, and they said later on, we have never seen a funeral like this. It was like a celebration,
Okay, yeah.
because, you know, when the testimony is that I'm going home to be with the Lord,
Yes.
and at a reasonable age, without any struggle,
Mhm.
it's a miracle.
Yeah.
It was a glorious funeral,
Yes.
if
Yeah.
there can be such a thing.
Yeah.
But of course, it affects people tremendous, and it affects different siblings in different ways.
Mhm.
That is when some people were upset and said, we didn't really know that as well as we ought to.
Okay, yeah.
But the thing is, though, I think that is more just the perspective that you have,
Mhm.
because I'm sure we all got similar attention. Dad was not a person that would
Show
draw one
favorites,
above the other, favoritism.
Mhm.
But I have even now oftentimes, then I think, oh, it'd be nice to ask Dad about this or that. You know.
Ah,
Not now much anymore, but at first years,
yeah.
all the time, you know, you think,
Yeah. Well, when you're married too, you about
Yeah.
marital life or kids
yeah,
or
you
all that
wonder,
kind of
you
stuff.
wonder what's his thought on this and what's his thought on that, you know.
Yeah. Okay. What about Beppa? When did she die?
Peppa died, what year was it, Mum?
It's 3 years ago.
Yeah, 3 years ago now.
Yeah.
2002. Okay. And how did her death affect the family? Like the cohesion and stuff, because that was a lot later, of course.
Yeah, much later. Plus also, it was slow in coming.
Mm-hmm.
You remember like how that she was starting to fail more and more and more.
Yep. And in a nursing
She
home.
started to forget at home already, and then she started seeing things, and
Yep.
we had to stay with her through the night.
Mhm.
And then after some time, it was quite controversial. That was one of the hardest things we could do as siblings together, is to put her into a
Mhm.
home care,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
nursing home. And that was very difficult for us all to do,
Yeah.
because we always had planned to take care of them as long as they lived,
Mhm.
but it was just practically impossible.
Yeah.
And anyway, there was pros and cons,
Mhm.
but it didn't split the family,
No.
because what we decided to do is give the authority to one, like my brother Ted,
Yes.
plus my sister Ann, who were mostly involved with Mom.
Okay.
And I said, you make the decisions, we
Okay.
will follow it.
Huh. Good.
And you know, so there was some controversy, and
Mm.
there were some people that struggled with it a bit more than others,
Mhm.
but it didn't split the family.
No. Okay.
It didn't make any. So, but Beppe, she started failing faster and faster, and
Mhm.
we were there all the time,
Yeah.
even in the nursing home, and even lots times late at night yet.
Yeah.
And then she passed away.
Yeah.
And it was for her a relief, and for all of us to a degree, a relief that it was finally over,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
But it was a harder way, much harder.
Mhm. I know my mother-in-law visited her sometimes in the nursing home, and she would say that in general conversation she would seem very distant or confused, but as soon as Beth would be praying, she was all
Oh, that
there.
was amazing, amazing.
Yeah, so
Like
that's-
when we, because even near the end, we would sometimes say, well, let's just have a time of prayer.
Mhm.
And then often she would pray.
Yeah,
And there was no hesitancy
Yeah.
whatsoever. She was fluent,
yeah,
and right on too.
yeah, yeah,
And talk about, like, mention names and situations, you know,
yeah.
in her
Right.
prayer that you would dream of normally. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, neat.
Fantastic.
Do you have any other comments you'd like to share about your upbringing or about your family, or any other stories, anecdotes that you wish you'd kind of mentioned up until now? Or
I know I would have not changed a thing,
no? Okay.
but I'm sure there's lots of stories that we could think
Mhm.
of that we could bring to mind. That
What's your fondest memory of your father and your fondest memory of your mother, and then we'll end at that.
often enough, like even when we were young, even in the wartime, they would take us on horse and wagon for a little ride to the seashore, and we'd swim.
Oh, okay.
That was nice because just break away from the regular routine and away from all the troubles, and just go swim in the sea.
That was kind of your mini vacation or
Mini
something?
vacation, yeah, just an afternoon, a couple hours.
Yeah, okay.
And things like that. And in some, like a couple of years, we used to go to one of the islands for a day,
Okay.
leave early in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Mom and dad and all the kids, plus the girl that worked for them would come along to help
How
And
would
we
you
go-
travel?
by boat.
Okay.
Like first horse and wagon to the harbor, and then by boat across, and the boat was a tugboat. And then to the islands, take an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And then you'd spend the day there, and Mom would bring a bottle of lemonade along, and then we'd ask for some water, and we'd get a basin with water, and make lemonade, everybody have a drink, and spend the day there in the dunes or at the seashore, and then in the afternoon go back on the boat and back home.
Neat.
And those were nice days, little outings.
Yeah, wonderful.
Those were nice days.
All right, thank you very much, Uncle Jerry, for your time. It's been wonderful to learn more about your history, and we hope that many of the people in the family will benefit from this video.
Yeah.
Thanks again. We hope that you enjoyed this stroll down memory lane. We trust that the information was accurate, interesting, and informative. Please realize this video was taken from one person's perspective, and please excuse any misinterpretations that we have made.